And hello, welcome to episode 39 of the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, where we talk about the novels of the greatest adventure writer of the 20th century. My name is Tim DeForest, and I am joined today by my co-hosts. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
By all means, my name is Jess Harrell, and you all might know me from the Facebook discussion group, The Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs, where we talk Burroughs and related topics pertinent 24/7 every day. And we have just, I do mean like yesterday, crossed the 31,000, he said, member count. So quite pleased with that. And we all have a great time there talking ERB all the time. Jess Terrell, for Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
I'm Scott Stewart, current editor of ERB APA or Herb APA, um, Amateur Press Association magazine dedicated to all things like Jess was talking about, Edgar Rice Burroughs. We have a limited membership on it. If someone's interested in joining, we have 2 slots left. We're just about maxed out. We're at 35 people right now, and you can just type in ERB APA on your search engine if you want more information or you're interested in contacting to become part of it.
Okay, and tonight we are going to be discussing the 1919 novel Tarzan the Untamed, where he takes on Germans in World War II and later takes on a city of crazy people. It is a wonderful novel, often cited amongst the favorites of ERB fans. But before we get into talking about the novel, yes, I hear the apes of Kircher, reminding us that we have a few special features. And first, we are recording this on October 28th, 2024. And it was just a few days ago that Ron Eli's family, his daughter, I believe, announced that he had died in late September. Ron Eli, is it Eli or Ely? Eli, isn't
Ely.
it? Ely. Ely. And I'm embarrassed for not knowing that. I'm a real fan of him as an actor. He, of course, played Tarzan in the 1960s TV series for a couple of seasons. And for a lot of us, he was the Tarzan we best knew when we were growing up. When I was growing up, they were often rerun on Saturday mornings, and I should have really been outside playing rather than watching television. But if I was going to be watching television, there were few things of better quality than Ronnie Lee's TV show. And I just want to say I'm sorry he's gone, and he leaves a good legacy as an actor. He was also Doc Savage in a movie, and I think was perfect for the part. Like a lot of other Doc Savage fans, I come sometimes quibble with the style of that movie and how they were kind of making fun of the genre as they were doing the movie, but Ely himself was superb as Doc Savage. He also in the 70s, I believe, he was in a short-lived remake of the show Sea Hunt, where he played the diver Mike Nelson that Lloyd Bridges played in the original series in the 1950s. But I'm sure all three of us have great memories of Ronnie Ely as Tarzan.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So, anyway, and our other special feature is our trivia question. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to ask a trivia question. And if you know the answer to it, you need to email it to us at our eggersmailbag@gmail.com. And this will be in the show notes. So you can find the email there. If you post the answer to this on social media or any other place where we show this podcast, that doesn't count. You have to send it to us via the Edgar's Mailbag Gmail. And if your answer is correct, we will do a drawing of all the correct answers. I'm going to give a deadline of November 15th, 2024, to get your answer in. And if you are the winner, you'll win a copy of the new authorized edition of Tarzan's Quest with a wonderful Joe Jusko cover on it. So once again, in a moment, I'm going to ask the question. If you know the answer to get for a chance to win the prize, send it to eggersmailbag@gmail.com. And the question is, what is the full name of the dog usually called Knobs? He does in the book in which he appears, his full name is briefly mentioned, but he's called Knobs almost all the time otherwise. So what is the name of the full name of the dog usually called Knobs. Send that into the Edgar's Mailbag Gmail, and you will be in the running for an authorized edition of Tarzan's Quest. And that is our special features for today. So we are going to be talking about Tarzan the Untamed, which has an interesting publication history. It was serialized in the Red Book magazine in late September and in the first half of late September of 1918 and the first half of 1919. That was the first half of what would become the novel Tarzan the Untamed. Another novella called Tarzan in the Valley of Luna was a 5-part serial that continues this story, and that appeared in All Story Weekly in 1920. These were combined into a book, and it was published as a book by McClurg in 1920. And I'm going to read, when we are doing our chapter summaries, we often use the excellent resource erblist.com, which has chapter by chapter summaries of all of Burroughs' work in it. We're using that tonight. And in the introduction to that, David Bruce Bozarth writes, there are the complexity of detail and quality of writing in this novel is exceptional for Burroughs. He does not lose his ability to tell a fast-moving, exciting story, but the overall excellence of his prose rises to a very high degree in this effort. Many consider this to be one of his best Tarzan novels in the series. So this is good stuff here. Something else we're going to note about the novel before we get into it, and we'll talk about this in more detail when we summarize chapter 1 in a few minutes, is Burroughs was initially planning to kill Jane for real in this. Tarzan will spend the entire novel up until the last few paragraphs thinking that Jane has been killed. But in the end, she turns out, nope, she's with that body you found, burned body you found wasn't her, it's somebody else. But his original intention before publishers made him change it was for Jane to be actually killed. I'm going to quote from the foreword for the new authorized edition to Tarzan the Untamed. And it writes that Burroughs understood that Tarzan's jungle adventures were the reason the Ape Man was so popular, but he had written himself and Tarzan into a corner. Following his wedding to Jane and their rearing a son, Tarzan had become too civilized, too encumbered as a landed English gentleman from London and African estates, too married. There wasn't enough ape left in the Ape Man. So in order to free him up to be able to run around and have adventures in the jungle, Burroughs tried to kill off Jane and was very unsuccessful in doing so. And once again, when we're summarizing chapter 1, where we think, along with Tarzan, if we hadn't read this before, that Jane has been killed, we'll talk about it in a little more detail. We'll talk about how movies and the Ron Ely TV show and others handled Jane or the absence of Jane. And so just keep that in mind when we're talking about this novel, that Burroughs' original intention was for Jane to bite the big one. So any comments from you guys before we go into the chapter by chapter summary?
Yeah, Tim, I want to jump in
like
here
to,
real
if I
quick.
may, I would like to add.
Here, Scott, you go first.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
I think the actual chapter summaries on this were done by David Adams, and the sidebar was by Bozarth.
You
and
were
he's
right. I
managing
misread.
editor on
Yes.
that.
Thank you for the correction, because I misread the little credit at the top. So I
And
apologize for that. Yes.
I also wanted to make a mention because you were quoting out of what is a new authorized ERB library editions with the covers by Joe Jusko.
Mhm.
And I'm still got a lot of stuff in storage, so I'm depending on my ebooks on my Kindle, and discovered recently that the new authorized editions are $3.95 for the Kindle editions, the ebook editions. They retain the whole format of the color cover by Jusko, the intro in this case by Henry Frank, who we both know, and Scott Tracy Griffith does a ending article in a book too. Plus, they include all the other extras, illustration and listing of books, and ERB and Joe Jusko biography on it, beautifully formatted and just a joy to read for $3.95. There's a lot of ERB books you can get out there free or for a couple dollars, but knowing that these are probably going to be void of most typos and OCR corrections or mistakes in it. Just a beautiful edition. I highly recommend. I went out and bought another half dozen of the titles, even though I got them hardcover. Hope to get them all on because they're just beautiful to look at on the Kindle editions.
Yeah, I do the same thing. When I get to the next Tarzan book to read, I buy the authorized edition if I don't already have it for my Kindle for exactly those reasons. Beautifully formatted, the great information we get from the introductions and the afterwards from Edgar Rice Burroughs experts. And so, Jess, you were going to add something earlier?
Yes, if I may, and not to undo or make any changes to your comments earlier about the Burroughs feeling the need to kill off Jane. I just want to add a slightly different perspective, and I have to think I read this in the Richard Lupoff book, Master of Adventure, but I have not confirmed that, nor have I gone looking for page numbers there. But yeah, the general idea was Tarzan and Jane, the story, was one of the greatest love stories of all time, and I still say that about it some 100 plus years later. But to your point, things had cooled off a little bit with time, with the responsibilities, and having at least one child, perhaps more. They were getting older. So it's a little hard to write. I think my understanding from the way I read whoever said this was it's a little hard to write a romantic story where everything is pretty well set and there's no challenge, there's no hunt for companionship, that kind of thing. So it was suggested, or it was felt, that perhaps if Tarzan was single again, then he could go on and have those romantic adventures hunting for someone. Now, the word hunt's not the right word, but pursuing a possible partner.
Yeah.
He could relive that part of his life, let's say, or get back to that point. Bertha Kircher, who appears in this book, was possibly a candidate for that. Now, of course, a case can be made that, and we'll probably discuss this, but a case can be made that since Tarzan believes she was a spy, that a case can be made that she should be executed on the spot. But being a moment, he cut her some slack. But it was suggested that perhaps maybe once he finds out that she's English and okay, that maybe he might find some interest. He certainly spent some portion of time keeping her out of trouble. That's for sure.
Yeah,
that was described as a courtesy towards a female, and certainly that's to be applauded. But that's one possibility. But my point is, not that Tarzan would go out with La or even name Oni. That's dangerous, either one of those. But other female possibilities, he could have had an opportunity to kiss around a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah.
Again, that's the way I recall what was said, and that's not taking anything away from what you said, Tim.
No,
Okay,
it doesn't at all. Just building on that, it is, and perhaps it's because in the end he didn't kill Jane off, and it is the eternal love story, and I think should be. It's hard to imagine Tarzan. It's appropriate for James Bond to have a different girl in every book because he's just kind of a jerk that way, and that's part of his character. But Tarzan,
he's James Bond.
Yeah, Tarzan, I can't see him going from lady to lady in each book. That just doesn't fit him. He would either be like madly in love with one person and eternally faithful to her, or he would be alone. Those are the only two possibilities in my view of Tarzan. Of course, all fans are going to have slightly different views. In my view of Tarzan, that's like the best I can come up with. Either he's going to be alone or he's going to be in love and dedicated and faithful to that one person. Now, of course, in later books.
Well, I have to agree to you. I was just going to say I have to agree, considering that Tarzan has this, I'll say, a code of ethics, behavior, rules by which to follow and conduct business. We've discussed that before, and being faithful to another once you get that commitment made is something I think is very powerful and very meaningful, both for both he and Jane. And if Jane wasn't there, then whoever's filling her shoes. Tarzan would be, I would see him being committed to her. Once again, he's got a lifelong relationship, and there's no time. And then we're going to do about having romantic stories. So one of the solutions that Burroughs came up with that was to have, shall we say, the guest heroes, and I'm thinking of James Blake as being one such example, have some kind of romantic entanglement instead of Tarzan. So that gave the readers some feeling for for
romance.
I guess,
Yeah.
but yes. All right, I'm done. I'm done.
That's okay. Yeah. But that is the solution. Burroughs' solution was two parts. I guess, yeah, I think we're just going ahead and talk about Jane now in that aspect of it, because we're having a great conversation here. Tarzan's solution was in two parts. After Tarzan and the Ant-Men, Jane didn't appear until Tarzan's Quest, like 8 books later, and that was her only other appearance. And Korak didn't appear at all after that. So his solution, without implying that they had a bad marriage at all, was for Tarzan to become actually rather an inattentive husband. And Jane apparently was okay with him. Hi, honey, I'm going away. I'll see you in 8 months. I'm going to wander around the jungle. And, because, presuming they both had immortality together, it might be that like 8 months doesn't make that much difference. It might change your time sense. So, but then the other solution was, as you said, to have a co-hero in almost every book. There is a co-hero, James Blake, or was it Eric von Harbin from Lost Empire?
Yes.
And Jason Gridley from Earth's Core, and so on and so forth. You always had this other character in there who was, not Tarzan, but would do okay in heroic terms and would end up with a girlfriend, would end up falling in love with someone over the course of the novel. That was almost inevitable in the later novels. So he did find a solution to this. And it was an effective one, because you always had fun books, although it was great to have Jane back in Tarzan's Quest. We did a podcast on that. So anybody listening, if you haven't heard that one, I think we had a great discussion about that novel. But it is interesting that, Jess, you mentioned before we started recording. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say just a couple of things I want to throw in there real quick. It just occurred to me. There was Nekima, and that is Jane could have had Nekima keeping an eye on Tarzan, because Nekima was going to run his mouth, and he just looked for an audience to talk to. So if Tarzan had gone astray, Nekima might have been there to speak up about it. and then the other thing, is, you stop and think about it. And Tarzan the Ant-Man, and I've commented on this before. Korak says, "Don't take my airplane," and Tarzan says, "What could happen? What could possibly happen?" And then he goes off and crashes Korak's brand new airplane. So there could have been some ruffled feathers over that one. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, there could have been. I was just thinking, if Tarzan had ended up falling in love with Bertha, if Jane hadn't turned out alive, and it was him and Bertha, and they're married, she's always off doing spy stuff, and he's always off in the jungle. So they might just have a relationship where they know they'll only rarely get to see each other. And he has the freedom to run around the jungle for 6 months because she's undercover in Constantinople, looking after, chasing after international spies.
A good point, and that's also the way I see his relationship with Jane there in those latter years.
Yeah.
And we'll find out from some of the ERB Universe publications, that some are already out, and I think maybe more to come, that Jane was being quite busy. And while Tarzan was off gallivanting around the jungle, Jane had a life of her own as a college professor, a researcher, scientist, that sort of thing. I'm done.
Yeah, well, that's a good way of handling it too. But whatever else, you have to, if you're going to keep Jane around, it has to be a faithful marriage, and they have to be in love. You can't break them up. That just couldn't be. Jess, before we started recording, Jess, you mentioned that the movie producers thought about killing off Jane, and Burroughs warned them that wouldn't work. And I know there were some movies where they kind of implied that Jane didn't exist. And in the Ron Ely TV series, there was no Jane. There was a 50s radio series where there was no Jane. So apparently you can do Tarzan without Jane at all, or you can do her with Jane, but you can't kill Jane off if she is there. Those are your two choices.
There are two fictional couples that you really can't pull apart. You don't want to mess with Tarzan and Jane. You don't want to mess with Superman, Clark Kent, Lois Lane. I mean,
yeah, DC is
they're too ingrained in our consciousness.
They are. DC Comics has occasionally tried to move Superman on. I think they tried to set him up with Wonder Woman once some years ago, and it just never classed. He is always back to Lois in the end. Yeah. So I agree. Those are probably the two couples in the fictional world which you can never ever tear apart. I kind of have to agree with that. So, okay, well, let's get into our chapter by chapter summary. We are starting with chapter 1, and we start off immediately with meeting some nasty Germans. And of course, every German in this novel is going to be nasty. Um, it's Hauptmann, which is Captain Fritz Schneider. He's got a couple of other officers with him, and they have some Askaris, some native troops, and some porters. And they're lost in the jungle when they stumble across the Greystoke estate. And this is the fall of 1914. The war has started, but word of that has not come to Jane yet. So Tarzan and Korak aren't home, and so she just welcomes him into the home with just she's being a good hostess. And then we cut away from the scene, and then when Tarzan returns from where he's been, he finds his estate burned to the ground. He finds a lot of his Wazari warriors have been killed, including one, Wasimbu, the son of Murvuru, has been crucified against the wall. And everyone else is dead, and he finds the charred remains of a body he believes is Jane because it's got her rings on the fingers of the body. So he curses the Germans, and he just takes an oath at this point to kill, in particular, to kill the Germans, whatever Germans did this, but just all Germans in general. From now on, if he sees a German, he's going to kill him. Germans are all bad guys. And in this war crime by the Germans, and this was a war crime, it's going to be followed by some pretty brutal revenge tactics by Tarzan. This is really a brutal novel. When I reviewed this novel on Facebook recently, I reread it for this podcast. An author, a really good novelist named Mark Ellis, saw it, and he remarked that it's interesting to him that Tarzan's sometimes seen as a child's character when you read a children's literature character when you read this, because there's some pretty stone cold stuff that's happening. He doesn't use the word stuff, he uses another word that begins with S, but some stone cold stuff going on here in this novel. And this is a brutal novel. Both the good guys and the bad guys are going to do some pretty brutal stuff. Comments from you guys about the first chapter?
A couple things, if I may. Well, certainly when Tarzan, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, certainly when Tarzan comes home and sees that his house, all the grounds have been destroyed, and a number of deaths, and the suggestion that Jane is dead, I would say he reverts to Mangani mode, or to beast mode. Maybe beast mode is better. I would suggest that he does that, and the first thing he does is he goes out and he picks a fight with a leopard who just happened to be in the same tree he wanted to occupy. And also I'm trying to keep track of the artwork. I was telling you all before we started that it seems to me, and I've not done a formal count, that there's more pictures available from this book that is highlighting scenes from this book than there is any other Tarzan book that I'm aware of. And one of those scenes, and some of these pictures come from a card set, collectible card set, trading card set that Joe Jusko did around 1995, if memory serves, something like that.
Yeah, I own that set.
The beautiful artwork. I think it's maybe 90 cards in the entire set, and every one of them just captures a moment from the books. So there's a card set in there of a leopard and Tarzan on a limb, and well, the leopard has to surrender the limb, no question about that. Go ahead. I had another point, but it'll come back to me later on.
Okay. Any other comments about chapter 1?
Reiterating what you said, this sets it up. I think maybe it was Golden Line, or a while back we were talking about another book about brutality of summer scenes. The writing on this, and probably because they were short stories that he formed into a novel or in that path, is incredibly tight, very tense, wonderfully descriptive. He's at the top of his game here, but it's a very adult story. When he's talking again about the buildings being burnt down and the bodies scattered around, and Wasimbu being crucified on the wall, and it's just horrific. And of course, then finding the charred remains of the female body, and then to dig up the German bodies that had been buried by their fellow troops so that he could find identification badges on it, who they were with, you know. And when he turns around, the title of this book, Tarzan the Untamed, really fits because earlier books, with Jane, he kind of does tame down. I mean, the stories are still action and a lot of stuff going on, but this is like taking the cork off a bottle. When he believes he's dead, he's got the single-mindedness of, I'm finding the men responsible for this, and they are not going to get away with it. And every part of the adventures that come ahead, it's hard not to get ahead in these chapters, but the encounters with people, with natives, troops, animals, very, very, very brutal. It's all to serve his purpose of moving forward. And there's some stuff that he does, I'll mention later and not give away that. I'm like, wow, I can't believe he's doing that, but found out he had reserved in his mind a reason why he did that, to come back to help him advance even more. It's and I'll bring that up in a chapter or two.
Yeah, actually, I think the other thing we can mention here is his portrayal of the Germans is, except for Bertha, who turns out, of course, to be an English double agent at the end. All the Germans are brutal and evil. There is no good Germans here. And this actually got Burroughs in trouble after the war ended and the book was translated into German, where he made money. He was popular in Germany. This novel kind of killed that for a while. This and Land That Time Forgot, where all the Germans are just utter scum. And he just makes it clear that if you're German, you're evil. That's all there is to it. So he actually lost the German market, or a big chunk of it, because of this. And I think that's why in books like the Tarzan and the Lost Empire, or Back to the Stone Age, he has German heroes or co-heroes. He was trying to get back in the good graces of the German reading public. But for now, if you meet someone and they're German, they're a bad guy. You don't even have to remotely worry about it. German equals bad guy.
I kind of wonder too with the backlash, because it went on for many years. He lost a large part of the market there. If later on, when the short unauthorized series there in 50s, or was it 60s, by Warner, or that were done by a German writer, if that wasn't in a way I don't want to say a nationalistic attempt, but a local attempt to capitalize on the Tarzan name, but having it done by a German or Germanic writer who the audience or readers in Germany might sympathize more with, as opposed to having that grudge against TRB.
Yeah. Okay. That is a good point. I never thought about those unauthorized ones. So we're gonna go on to chapter 2. Oh, sorry, Jess, you have anything?
Yeah, thank you. I have another point I meant to make earlier. I'll try to be brief here. This is book now. If you generally in identifying the books, this is considered book number 7 in the original books that original Tarzan books that the Burroughs wrote. Prior to this is book number 6, which is Jungle Tales, which is revisiting Tarzan's youth and many lessons he learned, how that all occurred. And then prior to that is book number 5, which is Tarzan the Jewels of Opar, one of my favorites, I might add, and I think another fine story. But my point there is that in Jewels of Opar, the Tarzan's property, his house, the compound facility is attacked there by, I think, as I recall, by some Arabs. And I think people are killed, and they may have burned that one down too. So my point is, here is an attack, and both instances here, with only one book between them, is attacks on Tarzan's property. And in my opinion, from a writing standpoint, you generally would not want to repeat an incident like that so quickly in the line of books. Maybe you could do it again 10 years from now, and change a few things, but just do it right after you, with only one book to separate you, in my opinion, is kind of taking a risk. However, in my opinion, both stories and the incidents involving the attack, all of that, I think, works very well. It's certainly believable. You get very wrapped up in it. It's plausible. And here you've got the belief the belief that Jane is dead, and you can see evidence that other significant people, like this young man, Wasimbu, I think, are dead. So it works, but that's not always going to be the case, I think, in the writing, because it sounds like you're repeating a plot sometimes.
Yeah, but he's
not
not. Yeah, he gave each instance its individual context, so it comes out differently each time. Also, in Jewels of Opar, we actually got to see or read the attack on the estate. Here, it happens off screen, and I think that makes a difference as well.
That is true. Good point. Good point. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, okay. This, by the way, will not be the only time that Tarzan thinks Jane is dead. He briefly thinks she's been killed in Tarzan and the Golden Lion, which we did a podcast episode on a few years ago. So that if they ever need marriage counseling, it will be because of that reason, because I thought you were dead again. So okay. So chapter 2. Tarzan heads south. He's heading for German East Africa. I want to mention briefly that Burroughs actually did some reading on the war in East Africa to try and present it with at least the general situation with a reasonable amount of realism. So he's heading towards that, towards German East Africa, so he can find the people who had killed Jane. He finds a lion's tunnel, a tunnel that a lion uses into this gorge, where the only way in and out is through that tunnel. And he eventually traps the lion in that jungle. The next day, he locates some native soldiers. He overhears them talking about the raid on his home. He captures one, interrogates him. He learns that Hauptmann Schneider killed Jane, and he gets the soldier to lead him to the headquarters. He kills the native because he finds out the guy had helped crucify Wasambu. He kills a sentry to get inside. He finds the German officers, and with Bertha Kircher, this is where we meet her. There's a pretty girl that he realizes is a spy. He incorrectly assumes she's a German spy, and she was pretending to be a German spy, so that's understandable. He grabs Schneider and carries him away, and this is where we see like a really brutal revenge. He marches Schneider through the jungle for 3 days. Then at the gorge where the lion is, he reveals his identity to Schneider. Then he forces him to climb down into the gorge. The lion chases the German into a tree, and Tarzan just leaves him there. Eventually, the German won't be able to, he's going to die of thirst, or he's going to climb down and let the lion get him, one or the other. Those are his only two choices. That's the last we ever see of Schneider. And this was pretty brutal, but considering what he did, it's kind of hard to feel sorry for him. But we get an example of just how brutal this novel is going to be in this chapter. Comments from you guys?
Isn't this the incident where Tarzan begins to infiltrate or the chapter where Tarzan begins to infiltrate the enemy, the German camp?
Well, he does so in order to capture Schneider. He's going to go back and infiltrate them again in order to help the British troops.
Well, okay, that addresses my question. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The reason I bring that up is that I was going to point out artwork that's available.
Okay. And
some of these scenes.
Yeah.
And there's 2 versions by Jusco.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Tim. You have something?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's 2 versions by Jusco of Tarzan, shall we say, surprising a German sentry who's out there watching for intruders, and there's an intruder flying down on top of him. Mm-hmm. So one of those is from the authorized library, and the other one is from that card set that I mentioned earlier. Both artworks by Jusco. Both, I think, are superb, which I would say about everything he does.
Yeah, the one on the authorized library cover, I think.
Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, the one from the cover of the authorized edition, I think, is him taking out the sniper, because he's going to kill a sniper and use that sniper's rifle against some of the Germans.
Right.
So, okay, any other comments before we go to chapter 3?
No.
Yeah, this includes one of those things where, first off, I really enjoyed the way Burroughs portrayed the confrontation between Tarzan and Lion. The lion wanted to attack, but was holding himself back. And if you've ever had a pet cat or watch, pet cat, and watching them hunt or play hunt, where they hold back and they want to go, but they're like timing it right. Tarzan, instead of leaping in and fighting like we expect him to do in the movies and comics and stuff, holds back, but because Burroughs has him thinking, I survive these things a lot of times because of luck. He says, do I want to push it right now? Do I really want to get in a fight with the lion after fighting the leopard just a day or two before that? And so how they hold off and how they balance and do that sort of cat and mouse play, I thought was a really nice way to step through it and show another confrontation instead of just a quick wrestle match and stabbing with the knife. And then when he leaves and he's able to get by the lion, but boxes him in with the rocks and boulders that he gets, so the lion's trapped in the cave. I didn't quite understand that. I'm sort of like, well, would he leave the lion like that to starve to death, forgetting or misplacing the fact that it opens on the other end into the gorge or canyon area where he brings the soldier back to drop him down there to be an appetite
Mhm.
for the lion. So I'm like, whoa, he's really thinking on this stuff. That's why he did that. And I believe also, well, not believe, but I didn't hear if you mentioned that this is where Bertha Kircher is introduced, and
Mhm.
Tarzan picks her off as being a spy pretty much right off from the top at that time.
Yeah, and we as readers, if we haven't read this story before, we have no reason to think she's not a German spy either. There's no definite indication to us that she's a British double agent. So when we find out at the end of the novel, it can be kind of a surprise to us as well.
Mhm.
So, and to your first point about him choosing not to fight the lion, I actually think that's important. It shows that Tarzan doesn't fight just to fight. He has to have a reason to do so. And he's secure enough in his ability, like he doesn't have to prove anything to anybody either. He knows that if he can avoid a fight, he'll do it. And he's not worried about people thinking he's a coward because he's just acting intelligently and not foolishly by fighting a lion when he doesn't have to. So
A brief thought regarding the lion, and
Mhm.
I am not, I am not, he said, underline this, suggesting anybody actually try this at home. But I would think part of Tarzan's training approach here to this lion, and it may not be here, but it's certainly in a forthcoming chapter, is he pretty quickly creates the barricades to fence the lion in to limit his movements. And then after that, the lion learns that the only meal he's going to get is from Tarzan. So if the lion wants to live, as most creatures do, he's going to have to be a good boy and do what Tarzan wants, or else he's just not going to eat.
And that kind of counterpoints the lion he befriends later in the story after he saves the lion's life. And a few books later, Jad Baljal, the golden lion, who once again feels a loyalty based on love and friendship. Here, he's just, I admit, yeah, I agree. He's just kind of putting the lion in a position where the lion has to obey him. And there's no love or loyalty lost there.
So it makes that, and that makes me wonder if, because, Jad Balja, when Tarzan decides to save the cub, the child lion, Jad Balja, because his own mother, the lion's mother's been killed, and it's a little cub that may not survive on its own. And Korok says, now, how are you going to do this? Or you really think you can do this? And I forget what Tarzan says, but Korok's kind of kidding him. It's a father-son chat. So there's some joking going on back and forth, but I think Korok's very, very sincere. Exactly, how do you think you're going to do this? Because Korok's got good jungle experience compared to most people, and he knows it's a tough job. But so it makes me wonder if Tarzan never really sat down and talked to his family about his own exploits during World War
Well, of course, at that point at the beginning,
like taking that line into the
yeah, of course, at this point in the beginning of Golden Lion, they're just coming back from Paolo Dunn.
Yes.
So he may not have had a chance to recount all his adventures yet.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe he spent a lot of the time assuring Jane that Bertha was just a friend.
Maybe she didn't get mentioned either. Maybe
So okay, well, this brings
that's why
us,
he didn't talk about it.
yeah,
I'm
that
done.
might
Go
be
ahead.
it. That means actually he run a bit of a con on Kurok by not telling him he had already trained a lion out of friendship once. So
They had a bet going on.
so he won his bet because he didn't he just okay, I kind of like that. Okay, chapter 3 is called in the German lines. Tarzan, he does go back to the gulch and he sees that the German is gone. The lion's very hungry because it's trapped in this gulch. So he kills a deer and I think a hyena as well, and he feeds them to the lion. Because I think he has at least the beginning of a plan here. He sneaks into the German lines, he kills a sniper, and he uses that rifle to wipe out a number of German machine gun nests. Then when they start to finally realize where the fire is coming from, he leaves. He sneaks back out of the lines. There's just no keeping Tarzan out. If he wants to sneak through your military lines, he's going to. He goes to British headquarters. He's recognized there by at least one person as Lord Greystoke, and he offers his help as a guerrilla fighter, since he can get back and forth through the lines whenever he wants. And he promises that he can empty a particular trench and open up that area for the British forces to be able to attack. On his way out, he glimpses a vaguely familiar face, which we later realized was Bertha, who was within British lines at that time. So one thing I took out of this chapter was a reminder that Tarzan does not depend on firearms, and he knows that if he's in the jungle for a long time, a firearm's going to get rusty and ruined anyway, so he doesn't use them. But when a situation calls for him to use a weapon, a firearm, he will do so. He's not anti-gun. He just prefers not to use them because he has other weapons that work better in the jungle. So any comments from you guys?
There's an old military rule, make use, and this comes actually from the Marine Corps, but it makes common sense. Make use of all available resources. So if there's a gun laying there, you need to shoot some people. Put your knife away, grab the gun, and go. As I see it.
Yeah.
I had another thought, but it's escaped me. So go right ahead. Maybe I'll get back to it later.
Oh, I was going to say, it just reminds me of Tarzan and the Foreign Legion, which was his World War II novel, where he is crashed in a Southeast Asian jungle along with a American bomber crew. And he tells them, just toss away your weapons. Within a few days, they're going to be rusted and useless. Don't even depend on them. So if they were reliable, I'm sure that he would have said, keep your weapons, we'll need them. But because he knew they weren't going to be reliable and they had to use other things. But later on, when he puts together his little guerrilla group and they're attacking Japanese bases, they're using weapons and grenades right and left. So
they probably borrowed those for that occasion, though.
Yes. So it's very situational for him. He does not normally use firearms, but when they are needed, he will use them.
Agreed. One thing real quick, I was going to add that I believed in Tarzan making his way back and forth between the German camps and the British camps. Seems to me like he snuck behind British lines also without bothering to introduce himself to the sentries or anything.
Yeah, he just shows up at headquarters and say, hey guys, he's kind of lucky somebody recognized him. So, he doesn't care about military formalities at this point in his career.
Okay.
I think it also shows, how would I say this? He has the refinement of a gentleman fighter in a way. We've seen he's a master swordsman, and in other books and crossovers, and here in the gun, I'm sure he's trained and had money and time and opportunity and teachers to learn how to use everything. And he uses what works best for him when he's going through the trees or through the jungles and swimming and stuff. If you're taking a sniper rifle with you and trying to carry 200 rounds of ammunition, you're not going to have the speed you'd have otherwise, or the reliability, what could happen to the ammunition or a rifle. So having a spear, or having his father's knife with him in his bare hands, and how he grew up with no weapons till he discovered his father's knife, is all very much one-on-one, not because it's honorable, because where he stops because he's not facing unarmed man, because here he's on the road to, he's going to take these people out one way or another, whether they're ready for it or not, because they've already committed these atrocities.
Yeah, and we're going to see in chapter 4, which we'll talk about in just a moment, that he's going to be using hand grenades and a machine gun. So, yeah, no moral objection to using weapons. It's just simply he simply doesn't normally need them. Um, so moving on to chapter 4, Tarzan kills some pigs and he makes a bag for the lion's heads and smaller bags for his claws, so that he can lead the lion out and force the lion to accompany him. And the lion, just as you mentioned earlier, it soon realizes the only way he's going to get any food if he follows Tarzan and obeys him. They reach British lines. He promises the colonel that he will empty a trench. He borrows some hand grenades. He takes the lion to the German trenches, and it's one of the most epic action scenes in here. And it's arguably the best action, just because there's so many great action scenes later. I won't say for sure this is the best one, but it is a brilliantly constructed action scene where he uses the machine guns, or a machine gun he captures, the hand grenades he brought, and the lion to either kill the Germans' troops or the native troops fighting for the Germans, or drive them out of the trench and retreat. And the advancing British are able to capture that ground where otherwise they had been stalemated or even were losing the fight. And his final act of the chapter before the battle ends is for Tarzan to break the back of a German officer, and then he just leaves. He's done his duty for his country, and that's something we should mention. He had said, "I'm giving up on mankind. Well, without Jane, I've got no reason for it." But he can't forget that he's a British citizen, and that is one of the main reasons, other than revenge against Germans, that is one of the reasons he stopped to help here. And he's the key to winning the battle here in East Africa. So comments from you guys?
Go ahead, Scott. I do.
Okay. I just in my
I
head,
do have something. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm looking at making use of the other weapons, machine guns, shooting, grenade, lion running ahead of them, going through the trenches, take out. I would love to see what Sam Peckinpah would have done with this.
It would have been bloodier than I care for in my movies.
Maybe, but what an incredible rhythm of action
Mhm.
that goes through this. Yeah, a little slower because when he's first trying to get the cat tamed down and feed it to kind of build up to it, but then when it lets loose, it's just bombastic. Wow.
Yeah, that is right. If Peckinpah had ever adapted a Burroughs novel into a movie, a Tarzan novel, it would have had to have been this one.
Absolutely.
That is a Peckinpah scene, and so is some of the later stuff we see. So, yeah. So, Jess, you had some comments?
Yes, by all means. Thank you. There are several pictures, book covers, book covers of Tarzan posing with lions associated with this book. So I have to think the lion that they're referencing is this lion from what I call from the pit, because that's where Tarzan keeps him when there's no action going on, that walled-in pit. Tarzan the Untamed has a cover of Tarzan and a lion just kind of standing there like they're getting a picture taken. So I have to think it's our friendly lion who's helping Tarzan out. Also, the paperbacks that had the cover by Bob Abbott, that's Bob Abbott paperbacks, have a picture of Tarzan and a lion posing. Well, they may be posing, but that lion looks like he's ready to go to work there.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got that very frightening look about him. And also DC Comics, Tarzan number 251, DC Comics published July 1976, has Tarzan on my right-hand side of the cover, and the lion on my left-hand side of the cover, and they are about to go into the German pit there. And then, of course, the Gold Key classic that you mentioned, that was Gold Key number 163, cover by George Wilson, and assistance by Mike Royer on that cover. And the internal art, of course, is by the great Russ Manning.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That covers us on the artwork associated with this chapter. I'm done.
Okay. And I just because you mentioned the Gold Key comic, I was going to, as an adaptation, it's an excellent adaptation of the story, and the Manning artwork is superb. it's interesting that they condense it to one issue
Mhm.
by leaving out all the stuff about Jane. She's not mentioned. And the revenge motivation isn't there. It's just, oh, the British are in trouble and I'm a British citizen. I better go help them. So it was an interesting decision for how to condense this into one issue. And it was by just leaving out the revenge stuff and having Tarzan basically just acting as a soldier for his country.
And you never know. We're not privy to the conversations that went on in the executive chambers there when they were talking about how to do these comics. Because as I recall, the Gold, and I love the Gold Key comics, so don't even think I'm criticizing. I'm not. They're very fond memories, and I certainly keep them in my collection. As I recall, the Tarzan the Earth's Core Gold Key comic runs 3 issues devoted to that story. Here, it's possible that the suggested death of Jane might have been considered a touchy topic for children, depending on, of course, the age
Um,
of the child, and even maybe some older ones might have taken it kind of rough. So that could be one reason left down. It's also possible just there were production or other economic issues there that they were trying to deal with. So they decided just give this one issue, make it a good one, and go forward. Go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, but actually, I think you're probably, and this is just my opinion as well. I don't have any anything to back it up, but the idea that they were trying to keep it more family friendly, I think is very likely because Gold Key, Dell, before they became Gold Key and then Gold Key, they were always very proud of being able to say we are family friendly, and they didn't shy away from violence, but the violence was never graphic. And I think Tarzan doing revenge killing probably would have been above and beyond what they were willing to show. So I think other than shortening the story for one issue for whatever reason they thought was appropriate to do that, leaving the Jane aspect of it out mean you didn't have to deal with revenge, and you kept it more family friendly in the view of the Gold Key editors and publishers.
Well, the idea of first of all,
Go ahead, Jess.
I think you're correct, but the idea of being family friendly makes me think, and I'm going into this one cold. The comics code that was established to guard the content of comic books to make sure that they were suitable. DC was a part of that. I know they were, but I don't know that Gold Key / Dell ever joined that. You might, do you know?
They actually did not because they didn't have to. They never did anything that the comics code would have objected to.
Okay.
I'm just gonna. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to use a kind of out there example. They did an adaptation of The Searchers, the movie where John Wayne and Jeff and another character spend years looking for a young girl who was captured by the Comanches. In the movie,
I know the movie well.
Right. In the movie, there's a scene where they find the girl, and the John Wayne's character, who's portraying someone who's broken by his racism, his hatred of Indians, is going to shoot her. And that comparable scene in the comic adaptation, he does not try to shoot her. And once again, that's the only time I can think of in a Dell comic or later a Gold Key comic where their family friendliness hurt the story because John Wayne's, his character, Ethan Edwards, I think was his name. His hatred of Indians was key to his character, and it made his decision to spare the girl at the end have real meaning. So, but I just think they left that out because no, we're not going to show the hero of the story about to murder a child. That's not, family friendly from their point of view. So no, they never had that stamp on them, that comic code stamp, because they didn't need it because they already followed, the same rules.
Well, they saw what was happening with the congressional hearings and that this stuff of self-regulation was coming in being. So very early on in Tarzan comics and other ones, you can find dozens of comic covers where it's photos of Lex Barker smiling or holding a monkey or chimp or something like that, canoeing, paddle boat, stuff like that in a canoe. Paintings of a lot of times Lex Barker or whichever Tarzan they might want at the time to portray, sitting eating bananas with monkeys. They're riding a zebra like he's racing. The stuff where he might be fighting a shark, or later on, alligators or dinosaurs came either much earlier or much later in the run of comics when they didn't have to worry about saying, "Hey, we're family friendly and our pictures show it, so we don't have to carry the codes because we've always been family friendly.
Mm-hmm. And they understood, I think children's literature in the 50s and 60s understood that you don't have to avoid violence. You might avoid graphic blood and gore, and you might avoid more brutal actions, but you can have a war story, or you can have a Western where there's gunplay and there's some dead people and all of that, because that's a part of storytelling, and you're not going to damage kids by having that. But they still
Well,
have
I'm sorry.
okay.
They adapted, lots of movies like War Wagon and
Yeah,
Dirty Dozen and stuff.
yeah.
So they weren't afraid to go in that thing, but they were very well balanced. There's soldiers going to go in, people get shot and stuff, but it wasn't a blood and gore thing. It's much more of the basic story structure.
Yeah, I agree. I have their adaptation of the Dirty Dozen. It's interesting to see a quote family friendly unquote version of that story. But they do have the guys killing Germans right and left. So,
Yeah.
It does happen.
I love that comic too.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we're going off on a tangent. It's just an interesting tangent. Dell, the publishing company, also, I think Whitman, that did children's books, was a part of the same publishing company.
Yeah.
And they did children's novels based on TV shows. And I still own the one based on a World War II series called Garrison's Guerrillas. And at the end of that novel, an SS general is holding the good guys at gunpoint. And then he groans and falls over with a bayonet in his back. And a guy who's been held prisoner by the Nazis for years comes out and spits on the corpse and says, "I've been waiting to do that forever." And everybody's okay with it. So this is like a children's novel. And along the way, they decided, well, it's a war story. If the Nazi's going to get bayoneted in the back and spit on, then we're just going to do that. So they did have family-friendly rules, and I think we see that in their adaptation of Tarzan the Untamed, but they didn't think kids were wimps, and they knew that a child wouldn't be broken by a story that had some degree of violence in it. So
I agree.
yeah. Okay, so
Agreed.
sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but I hope that people listening found that interesting. We are up to chapter 5. He scouting the German lines, he actually finds out he kills the wrong Schneider. The guy he killed wasn't the person who killed Jane, but it was his brother. So he finds out where Schneider is. He heads there. In the meantime, Bertha Kirchner, who's trying to get back to the German lines, she's lost in the jungle after her lion had killed her horse. They meet each other when she's about to be eaten by that lion, and it's the same lion from the pit that had learned to be scared of Tarzan. So he was able to chase the lion away. He speaks to Kirchner in perfect German, gets the dead horse off her because she was trapped under a horse, and they move away, and she sees the locket she's wearing. It's the locket that Jane used to wear. And it was given to her by Schneider. And he's taking her back to British headquarters to turn her in. He can't bring himself to kill a woman, even a German woman. So he's going to take her in and turn her into the British. And she has a chance to knock him out with the butt of her pistol. That's how chapter 5 ends. And how often does someone get to cold cock Tarzan? That's actually quite an accomplishment. I mean, that's got to be first on our future resumes. I once knocked out Tarzan. Who else can say that? So
That's an interesting point. I had not considered that.
But it's, once again, it's emphasized here that this lion fears Tarzan, and it just, once again, it counterpoints the lion he'll rescue later in the story that and his friendship with the golden lion in a future book, where it'll be love and loyalty and trust, not fear. So his animal training techniques get better as time goes by. Any comments from you guys?
Well, I just want to point out that continuing my survey of artwork that supports this book, again, from that Jesco card set that we've been discussing, there is a picture there, which I believe is called Golden Knockout, is the title of it, that shows Bertha Kirchner laying on the ground with her horse having been overtaken by the lion, and the lion may be nearby there somewhere. So it's a very dire moment in her life. But Jesco captures that very nicely on that card. I'm done.
Okay. Any other comments about this chapter?
Yeah, I kind And at the end, I'm like, really? It's just sort of like, you're gonna let yourself get knocked out by her. It just didn't yeah, it just kind of left me in that state. Oh, really? But there's some good explanation and action showing his strength here by being able to lift a horse and how he works with the lion. But yeah, so my friend and I were talking the other day, semi Tarzan related in a pulp way, I guess, rewatching TOS original Trek series. And it's like, how many times are you guys gonna tell these strangers you don't know how the ship runs and then let them take the ship over?
Well, of course, when he let Khan read technical manuals after Khan came out of suspended animation, he didn't know the guy was a genetically engineered super genius who could figure this out
That's true.
instantly. He figured, okay, it's going to be months or years for him to get caught up. I might as well give him a head start. So there was an excuse there. There's an excuse there.
Real quick, while we're
Hmm.
on Star Trek, and I'll be quiet.
Mhm.
I never understood, and this is original series, the one that really did this, I think, a lot. I never understood why, when someone was a guest on board ship, and this includes Khan, they gave him a uniform shirt to wear. That didn't make any sense to me, because here's all these plebes down here. They're working their tails off to advance to the ranks, and some guy comes in from nowhere. They didn't know who he is. He's never been a part of Starfleet. He never heard of Starfleet until 5 minutes ago.
Well,
Here he's got a captain's shirt on.
Well, they didn't have the same level of replicators they did in later years in the other series, so they had to give them what they had on hand.
But notice they never gave the guests a red shirt.
That's true. And also now that I've said that, no, they were able to whip up like Nazi uniforms or native clothes whenever they needed it. So they could have made something other than the uniform. So
I'm a temporary guest here. I'm just visiting.
yeah, I know. So yeah, can I be a lieutenant today?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's enough for me. I'm done.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a neat little fun.
Tarzan on the Enterprise. Now that I'd pay to see.
That would be cool. That would be cool. So we're up to chapter 6. Vengeance and Mercy, it's called. So Tarzan is he's on the ground. A panther actually finds him while he's still unconscious, but that lion comes back and kills the panther to save him. Bertha took away the locket again because there's actually papers hidden in it that she needs. And he follows her to a railway she stumbled across, and she took a train into the German-held village. So he follows to there. He kills a German guard dog, and he kills an officer who comes in search of it. He dresses in the officer's, standard adventure novel rules. When you kill someone, their clothes will always fit you close enough to get by. So he finds the right Hauptmann Schneider and kills him with a knife through the heart. He takes his locket back again, but he leaves Bertha behind. Once again, he's thinking of him. He's mad at himself because every time he meets this girl, he knows he's a German. He believes she's a German, and that he should just kill her because she's German and therefore evil. But he can't bring himself to do it. He's actually mad at himself for a lot of this novel because he sees himself as like a weak old woman because he can't make himself kill a woman. He gets a document that it's mentioned, I think, in a later chapter. He takes to the British that helps them with their further military stuff. But after he's gone, she retrieves some more papers from the dead German. And that will come into play later on too. So that's chapter 6, and I think the important thing is here is it's really emphasized that he can't bring himself to kill the girl, and it's not because he suspects she might be British. It's just as much as he's telling himself he's done with humanity, there's still rules of honor that that have become a part of him in his time in civilization that he's never going to get away from. He's never going to be able to hurt a woman if other than maybe in direct self-defense. If a woman's trying to kill him, I guess he might act, but he's never going to just kill a woman out of hand, no matter who he believes that woman to be. And it's an important aspect of his character. So any comments from you guys?
No, I agree with what you said. There were no comments.
Okay.
Yeah, the same thing. And It's interesting how Burroughs put it where so that he made a mistake on when he killed the first Schneider, but
Mhm.
they're still connected, being brothers and being evil Germans,
Mhm.
to do this. But yeah, and here it isn't so much a fight or anything. They just show him going in and doing the job, taking him out, where you almost expect it to be a confrontation and wrestling and maybe with other people around or whatever. But he just goes in there and takes care of it and says, okay, now I got to get on with the rest of the business of this vengeance, revenge, and war.
Mhm. Yeah, it really is. Burroughs has Tarzan going on his roaring rampage of revenge against Germans, but he never forgets Tarzan's essential character, and it's one of the strengths of this book. Um, so chapter 7, Tarzan is ashamed of himself because he couldn't kill Bertha, but he's revenged Jane's death. He's gotten the people directly responsible for Jane's death, and so he just makes a conscious decision to just forget about civilization entirely. He wants to get back to where he grew up, the Mangani there, and rejoin them. He thinks to himself, acquaintances he numbered by the hundreds, but friends he had few. And he probably did have few friends. He's not thinking twice about his son, though, which, you have to, I think we can talk about. But he's going to take a shortcut across the desolate plateau to get to where he grew up. But he keeps crossing these different canyons. He finds the bones of an ancient Spanish soldier and a metal cylinder there containing a mysterious manuscript and a map, and he takes that with him. But he almost dies of thirst in the desert before he finally gets to finds water again. At one point, he actually tricks a vulture by playing dead and coming down there and drinking the vulture's blood and eating the what meat the vulture has in order to keep going. And finally, there's some rain, and he reaches a new land of with jungle where he can survive again. But he comes very close. It's a reminder that Tarzan is not indestructible, because this trip across the desert does almost kill him. Um, and it's a very vivid scene. But I didn't have this in my notes because I didn't think about it. He does have some friends, like Paul Darno in Civilization, but he doesn't have many, so he can give that up. But should Tarzan have thought that, well, I've got a now adult son and a daughter-in-law and a grandkid somewhere, and maybe I should go pay a little attention to them? But he doesn't seem to give them a second thought. Um, do we just rack that up to his grief of losing Jane? What do you guys think?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very good question to pose, and we may have to default that, well, he's not thinking clearly, so
Mhm.
that's why he's not trying to contact any of these people. The U.S. is not the U.S. Let me think about this. Great Britain would not have gotten into the war with Germany yet, so Korak presumably is not engaged with
No,
the.
no, actually they are at war. That's why they're fighting in East Africa. Britain was one of the first.
They are at war. Okay,
Yeah,
so
they are at
Korak
war.
could already be off right,
Yeah,
Africa.
in Tarzan the Terrible,
I
the
said
next one.
it wouldn't have been Africa. He'd be fighting with the British.
Yeah, but in Tarzan the Terrible, the next book, it's mentioned at one point that he was serving in the British Army at the Somme in the big battles in France.
Okay,
So,
okay. That may explain his absence. And still, trying
mhm,
to contact the boy, I think, would be very necessary. He needs to know what's happened back home. No
mhm.
question about that. That's the right thing to do. But perhaps now I'm
Yeah, I think Tarzan just wasn't thinking
making
everything
excuses
through.
for him. Maybe Tarzan just isn't thinking clearly just yet.
No, I think he's not. I think
He,
if he'd,
we know he. I was going to say this earlier. We know he's had trouble with amnesia,
mhm,
and that and a good thing about that knock on the head he got earlier from Bertha didn't give him amnesia, so he didn't
mhm.
have to do that in this book. That's all I have for the moment. I may have something in a minute.
Yeah, but I think we could say that maybe he's just not thinking as clearly as he should be. I mean, if he had gotten to the Mangani, to his where he grew up, that area, and contacted the tribe, in Tarzan of the Apes, he was eventually dissatisfied with them and wanted more human contact. So I wonder if he really would have permanently cut himself off from mankind if he'd gotten back to the apes and not just finally started thinking, oh, I couldn't leave without like talking to my son. That was wrong, which I think he would have realized eventually, but just living with the apes without the companionship of someone he can have an actual conversation with. That's why he grew dissatisfied with them in Tarzan of the Apes. And I'm not sure, in his grief, he just seems to have forgotten a lot of this. And I don't think he actually would have been happy living off in the jungle by himself again. So
I think you're right. And that would be, I would consider that long term. He may come to his senses, but it may take him a while to reach that point.
mhm,
He may be fine until one day he wakes up and says, "This is not how I want to spend the rest of my life." There's
mhm,
family out there, that sort of thing.
yeah.
While I've got the floor here, real quick, let's see. Have we discussed the fight with Sky yet in the desert?
I mentioned it briefly. I
Okay,
didn't
good,
talk
good.
about it in any detail.
Good. I thought you did. I was going to say that there was an artwork there by J. Allen St. John of Tarzan fighting Ska, and I've got another one here somewhere. That's one I just mentioned. And you mentioned the locket, didn't you?
I did.
Okay, good. That there's a Jesco artwork for the locket, and that's again from that card set we talked about.
Mhm.
I, I think Ancient Warrior, I think is the title of that.
Oh yeah, there is a Jesco of it.
It's a very nice, I think, very nice item. And
Yeah.
also that locket, that I'm saying locket, I really mean that metal cylinder.
Mhm.
It comes into play later on in the book Tarzan and the Dark Heart of Time,
Mhm.
written by Philip Jose Farmer.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I have. Go ahead.
That's okay. Any other comments about chapter 7?
Yeah, I think he, and it states in the first chapter or whatever word Burroughs used, but he goes strictly primal here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he thinks about contacting his son, but part of it now is focused, take care of the revenge thing, maybe let his son know in the future, or who knows where Miriam's at. He might not even know exactly how to get hold of him, even when he's with the British officers, instead of trying to process it and saying, "Oh, by the way, I want you to get hold of my son or my daughter-in-law, and this is how you might be able to do it." He's still on that one-track mode. Jane's been taken away from him. His plantation or ranch, farmstead's been totally destroyed, and he's going after. He's reacting to what's been done to him to make sure that's taken care of before everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the part where he tricks the vulture to come down, because to me, it's believable that if he's able to grab and kill a vulture, a large bird, both because he eats different than we do at McDonald's, eating the bird and getting the blood and the moisture and stuff, I think could help rejuvenate him to be able to continue on its journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would. One last thing about Korak. It is fair to note that Korak is an adult by now, and so it's not like he's abandoning his child by running off here. Korak's a perfectly capable adult who has his own adult life and his own family. So there is, well, we have to consider that too. So he's not abandoning a child. He's not being an absentee father when he decides to run off to the Mongolian.
Yeah.
He's just this is how he's processing his grief, I think is the best way of saying it. So chapter 8.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 8, Tarzan, he's searching for some of the great apes. But there's a renegade mob of black soldiers, men who were serving with the Germans, but who deserted along with some of their women. And they've captured Bertha Kirchner. And he doesn't want to rescue her. He doesn't want to rescue her spy, but he does, he does kill one of the men in the column just because they work for the Germans and they're not, and therefore they're bad guys. And the leader, Sergeant Usanga, he finds a native village and he trades with them. And when one of the other soldiers or one of the natives, one of them makes advances towards Bertha, he kicks him out of the hut that they're staying in because he wants to make advances of his own, but he's scared of his wife, Naratu. Usanga is the leader of the soldiers, but he's also a totally broken husband who's completely nagged by his wife, and he's terrified of her. So she chases him away from Bertha. So Bertha's kept safe from any unwanted advances by this wife Naruta, who doesn't care about her, but just doesn't want her husband getting involved with her. And then, meanwhile, Tarzan's had a change of heart. He's got to rescue the girl. He can't ignore that. He's still mad at himself. He's still thinking, I'm just, uh, um, a useless old woman because I can't get away from this. I keep feeling badly about this woman being in danger, even though she's a German. So he returns to rescue Bertha. He finds out that she's gone and that there's the body of a warrior there. She's actually killed the guy and gotten away. She's very capable. And when Tarzan finds some apes, he fights and subdues one of them and just becomes a part of the tribe, and he's taking part in the Dum Dum. Bertha sees this and she's terrified, but a panther chases her into the middle of the Dum Dum, and Tarzan keeps her safe from the apes by saying, "This is Tarzan's she." He's humiliated by this. She's an evil German. He hates doing this, but it's the only way he can keep her safe. Now, of course, this mercy he shows her is going to pay off big time in another chapter or two. But once again, we see that Burroughs always understands Tarzan's basic character, his basic honor that he'll never get away with. However thrown into grief he is by Jane's loss, and however much he dislikes Germans in general, he's going to help a damsel in distress whenever he can. That's something he'll never be able to ignore, that aspect of himself, even when he tries to. Comments from you guys?
Go ahead, Scott. I'm looking something up. We'll come back.
Okay. Yeah, I'd go along with what you're saying on this. The part of this story or chapter that really stuck out for me was where he takes and kills the last person in the warrior line like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of like the hunting, like Sergeant York supposed to have done turkey hunting like that and got rewarded, or not rewarded, but recognized for taking out Germans basically on a similar process of starting from the back and going forward. So that makes sense for him to do this. What I thought was the big twist on it is he's taking a person from the end of the line, killing them, and then managing to get up in front of everybody to place a head up on a branch or a tree so that people come across that and they're going to go, wait a minute, he's dead? Isn't he supposed to be behind us? I think that'd send a panic through the whole group of people.
Yeah, Tarzan's using the psychological warfare he learned when he was enemies of the cannibals when he was growing up in Tarzan of the Apes. And he perfected that when he became chief of the Wazari in Return of Tarzan, and he used terror tactics against the Arab slave raiders that had raided the village. So he's very good at psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Now, Jess, did you have anything?
I was just going to add that in keeping track of artwork associated with this book, I failed to mention some of the works by J. Allen St. John, the first edition, and these are a black and white or a sepia tone. There's a first edition artwork of showing Tarzan dancing with the apes, with the Mangani, that is, and probably a Dum Dum event, and perhaps Bertha Kircher is off to the side there observing all of this. I'm sure she's being quite amazed by what she's seeing. That's all I have.
Okay. Yeah, well, that brings us to chapter 9, where we are introduced to Lieutenant Harold Percy Smith Aldwick, which I think is an absolutely wonderful name. He's with the Royal Air Service, what would later become the RAF, and he's flying on patrol. And his plane stalls out. He has some engine trouble, and he has to land. Before he can fix his plane, he's captured by the local cannibals, the same people that have befriended the deserting soldiers, and he's taken to the same village. Meanwhile, Tarzan and Bertha they've built a boma, a wall of thorns, and a hut, and he intends to leave her there once she's safe from the beasts of the jungle. He sends her to the river for water, and along there she's accosted by one of the apes, Golat, the king of the local tribe. Tarzan comes to his rescue, and Golat respects that she's Tarzan's she. And she goes on the hunt, leaving Bertha under the protection of the apes. And she goes into the hut, and she just bursts into tears. She's a very, very, very courageous woman. She's shown that already, and she'll show it again. But you can't blame her for crying in this situation. She's being her only protector is a guy who openly hates her, and he doesn't even know why. She doesn't even know why. And now she doesn't know if he'll ever come back or not. So you can't blame her for needing a good cry at this point. I think Burroughs also establishes Percy as being very brave and intelligent. He handles himself well, both as a pilot when he has to make a emergency landing and in trying to fight the cannibals when he's captured. Any comments from you guys?
Well, Tarzan should have been around some of the British people by this point in his life, and probably encountered some of those in the military. So he I think also understands that Tarzan is pretty unique among people, and not everyone reaches his level of performance or abilities. But someone like the person who can do things like that, I think Tarzan. I agree with you that Tarzan would admire that.
Yep.
I'm done.
Okay.
Okay. And for a minute I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. I find it interesting that, and it might be the way he did the stories originally or grouped here, that a major player comes in, not quite halfway in the book, but we're on chapter 9 between when Smith Oldwick gets in here, who's going to be a major player. But that also gives them a character who's fresh now to work with, because it is I believe this is his lengthiest Tarzan book, but it doesn't seem long. A lot happens in it, and I think it works really well to introduce him at this part instead of someone we've already known for 9 chapters. We're going to see new storylines open up with him for the rest of the book.
We should know for the last couple of chapters, we've gotten into what was originally the second novella of the 2 novellas he put together to form this novel. So if you're reading this for the first time in All Story Weekly, then Percy's showing up right near the beginning of the story. It's a different rhythm when it's put together into a novel, but here it's real early in the story. So it's the appropriate time from that point of view to be introducing characters. So,
yeah.
Go ahead, Jess.
I've got the schedule here in front of me for All Star. First of all, it appeared in Red. I hope I'm not interrupting. Sorry. It appeared in a Red book from 1919 of March through August 1919, and then it appeared in All Story Weekly 1920 March, and like in several installments here. March 20, March 27, April 3, 10, and 17. And that was Tarzan in the Valley of Luna. That would probably be the second story arc.
Yeah, it would have picked up when he walked off and when he was going across the desert. Would have been where the new story picked up. So we're a couple of chapters into the second novella.
Right.
Yeah.
But the value of these novellas, with them appearing, yeah, granted, news in those days did not travel at the speed that we're accustomed to today, but still, he can write a chunk of the story, have it published in a magazine like Red Book or All Story, and then talk to people at least he knows, makes a few phone calls perhaps, and ask them what they thought about his story. So my point is, he can adjust the next segment or next group of chapters if he needs to refine the direction the story's going. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Well, that brings us up to chapter 10. Tarzan is checking out the cannibal village, but when he climbs out onto a branch, the branch is rotten. It was rotten on the inside, so he had no way of noticing it. But it cracks and he drops down into the village and he's knocked unconscious and gets captured. It's kind of neat that it's just dumb luck. Tarzan didn't do anything wrong. He has his normal skills, but it was just a rotten branch got the best of him. He's thrown into the same hut as Percy. There's an interesting discussion where Tarzan just gives him Percy his philosophy about life and death. And then he starts trying to chew his ropes off. But a guard sees what's happening and he hits Tarzan with his spear and he ties them tighter. And it looks like they're doomed. Tarzan says, while there's life, there's hope, but it looks like the clock is ticking on them. But in the meantime, one of the apes from the tribe of Gulat sees what's going on. He goes back and he tells Gulat, Gulat doesn't want to bother saving Tarzan, but there's 8 young bulls who decide they want to go with Zutag to rescue him. And Zutag goes up to Bertha, but Bertha doesn't talk the Mangani tongue. And so in the end, he just has to grab her and carry her along to bring her along on this rescue. And it's a good thing that they do, because when Tarzan and Percy are being tied to stakes to be burned before they're eaten, Bertha gets hold of a spear and she actually leads the apes in a charge onto the natives. She gets Tarzan free. He throws 2 pots of boiling water on the natives. It clears them back enough to where they can get Percy loose and they escape. A couple of the apes are killed in the fight, but the humans and most of the apes get away. And Tarzan just has to be very unhappy that he was just saved by a hated German. But Bertha does great here, and she's directly responsible for saving Tarzan's life. At this point, there was nothing Tarzan could have done to save himself. He was stuck. So it's another epic action sequence. It's right up there with Tarzan and the Lion clearing the trenches earlier in the book, I think. It's one of Burroughs's best action sequences. Comments from you guys?
Well, I have to point out that the sequence there you just described of Bertha getting involved with the Mangani and going off and rescuing Tarzan, and all the little interactions there and throwing some hot water on the bad guys and that sort of thing. Would that look good on a movie screen? I mean, I think it would be thrilling and enchanting, and it would just work so very, very well. Now, in my survey of the artwork here, this is from the first edition. And you'll see these, it may be from first edition, but you'll see these pictures on Facebook, okay? Because I have access to all of these and display them in my discussion group periodically. And by the way, for anyone listening, if there's a particular picture I reference here and they want to see it, and they remember my group, or they want to join the group, come on over. I'll round up the picture and get it displayed for you. Anyhow, at the beginning of that tale that you were just describing, that one Mangani Gulat, I think is his name. There is an
Zutag is the one who sees him a prisoner and leads the rescue.
Well, the one that approaches Bertha. Pardon?
I'm sorry, the one who approaches her to make her go on the rescue?
Zutag.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zutag. Yeah.
Right. So there's a hand drawing, again, this is black and white sepia, but still fine artwork by J. Allen St. John, showing Zutag approaching Bertha. And the interesting is she's kind of hugging a tree when he's talking to her. She's no doubt frightened. She does not know the language. These big hulking creatures that look very dangerous, and we know they can be. And she's kind of bent over, protecting herself. But Zutag's standing there talking to her as best he can. And as you stated, she gets the wind of what he's talking about. So my point is that instant is captured very nicely here by J. Allen St. John. I'm done.
Okay. So any other comments for chapter 11?
Yeah, I like
or chapter 10 rather. I'm
chapter
sorry.
10. Yeah, I'm like, wait a minute. Time warp. I like this with the rescue with Zutag and Bertha, because one of the things I remember, at least in the comics or movies, I might be misremembering a bit, but even though Tarzan would have violent encounters with animals, to me, I remember it as a kid, I guess it'd be the kid-friendly thing. There are a lot of animals he could communicate with or would work with, and they would work with him. So having the great apes here come to rescue him like this reminds me of like scenes, I think, where he lets out his cry and the elephants come rushing to his rescue or whatever like that. So it's a nostalgic part of Tarzan that I enjoyed in this chapter here.
Okay. Now, before jumping to chapter 11, I'm just going to say that if this episode goes long enough when we finish recording and I divide it into 2 parts, this is where I'm going to cut the part. So, if this turns into a 2-parter, goodbye, and part 2 will be up and within a week. But if it's not a 2-parter, either way, we're jumping into chapter 11. So those of you listening to this, you may or may not have to wait a week before you get to this next part, which is the summary of chapter 11. Finding the airplane. So Tarzan, he wants to get back to the haunts of his youth, is the way it's described in the ERB list chapter summary. You know, he wants to go back to where he grew up in the Mangani there. But now he's got two people to look after, you know, and he owes his life to one of them, even though he hates her because he's a German. And he's just dislikes the idea of the long march to get him back to civilization. And a leopard attacks, and Tarzan struggles with the beast, and Bertha saves him again by stabbing with a spear. So once again, this hated German woman has saved his life. It's really getting on his nerves. He tells he tells Percy that she's a spy, but he can't. Percy can't make stuff hate her. In fact, he's in the process of falling in love with her. When Tarzan goes off to hunt, Percy and Bertha decide on their own to get back to his plane. He thinks he can fix it. They leave him a note, and they're heading back to the airplane. But Usanga, the leader of the deserters, has already found it. And when Percy and Bertha find the plane, Usanga and his warriors step out of the bushes and capture them. So chapter 11, it gives us another example that Tarzan is not indestructible. And we talked earlier about him choosing not to fight the lion at one point when he didn't have to. Now we see why he doesn't fight when he doesn't have to. He's capable of taking a lion or a leopard out in a fight because he's done it many times, but it's not a guaranteed thing. And here, if Bertha wasn't there to stab the leopard with a spear, then he might have lost this fight, and that would have been the end of his career right there. So it is an example of Tarzan, however capable and tough he is, he's not indestructible, and he can be killed. And every time he fights a lion or a leopard, there's a risk involved. And what do you guys think? Did Bertha and Percy make a wise decision in trying to get back to the airplane on their own? Or should they have waited for Tarzan to come back and say, hey, we can get out of your hair if you just take us to the airplane?
Wait,
Tarzan would have known there was enemies hiding nearby. So, what do y'all think?
Go ahead, Scott. I think you were about to say something there.
wait.
Wait, yes.
It's always,
I agree.
almost always the right thing to wait for Tarzan.
Yes. If you can be escorted through the jungle by Tarzan, it is preferable to not being escorted through the jungle by Tarzan.
And actually, a way to look at that then is if he doesn't escort them, he's going to have to come rescue them. So he might as well go ahead and get it done right the first time.
That's true. Yeah. And he probably would have been perfectly happy. Now I can get them out of my hair, get them back. They can fly back home, and I'm free, and I can go back to my homeland.
But
So,
the thing I have to point out to Tarzan here is, look, buddy, this girl's rescuing you and helping you out. You could have far worse troubles than that.
Yes, you could.
And I'm going to leave on a high point. Go ahead. Next,
Yeah.
y'all continue.
But something I just thought of is this second novella was published in 1920 after the war ended. So you didn't have anti-German propaganda all over the place anyway. So readers would have thought, okay, would you stop hating her because she's German? She's obviously a cool person, a brave person. And they wouldn't have been automatically against her because she was German, the way readers might have been during the war, if you see what I mean. So he would have had his readers sympathizing with her and just thinking, okay, Tarzan, you need to just let it go.
But that makes me think, though. Let's just say she actually were the Germans was the German spy that Tarzan initially thought she was. Let's consider that. And even though the war may be over with, she is a German spy who's been responsible for perhaps not war crimes, but certainly responsible for antagonizing and perhaps for the deaths of Allied British soldiers and the like. And she's on the wrong side from where Tarzan stands. So does he punish her in some way? Does he simply turn her loose in the jungle? Does he help her? It becomes a moral
But if
question, I think, as to how you handle this.
Yeah, but
you also she doesn't exist.
You also look at it, if she wasn't committing war crimes herself, and she wasn't slaughtering civilians. She was doing her job to her country.
Right.
So if she had been a German spy and not a double agent, she just would have been doing her duty to her country. And if the war was, in Tarzan, in publication time, the war was over. But in the timeline of the novel, it was probably still 1915. So the war is still going on. So if she had been a spy at the end when they're
Okay.
rescued,
Time
when
on the
they're
novel, that puts the ring.
yeah, yeah. So if she's rescued by when they're all rescued by British soldiers at the end, she would have gone to jail and she might have gone to the hangman's noose. So, it may not have ended well for her, even if Tarzan decided not to do anything.
But then the other thing is, let's just say they're on the verge of being rescued. Tarzan gets some whiff that hey, help's coming, and then she is indeed a British spy, and she aims to hurt British and Allied troops. But she's also done things here to help Tarzan. So as I see it, the quandary that he could be in, this is hypothetical, but the quandary would be, what does he do with her? Does he turn his back and let her escape, or does he turn her over to the British, or do they run off together, or what happens?
Or does he turn her over to the British but use his influence as Lord Greystoke to say, okay, let's not execute her, just intern her for the war and keep her locked away, and she's out of it, and she's safe, and she goes back home after the war ends.
That's a very good point. Now that I've stirred up all that controversy, I'm done talking on this topic.
And of course, this is a what if rule where alternate universe where Bertha was actually a German spy rather than a British double agent.
I'll take that. I like alternate universes.
Okay. Anything else about chapter 11? Okay, chapter 12, we have Usanga, the leader of the deserters, wanting flying lessons. And he has no idea how much trouble it is to learn to fly a plane, but for Bertha's sake, Percy agrees to give him lessons. And he, after a couple of days of lessons, he ties them up, and he throws Bertha into the plane and he takes off with her because he wants to fly way to the north to an Arab sheik and sell her for a chunk of money and get away from his nagging wife. So that's a chapter that just takes a moment to summarize. Usanga's not qualified to fly a plane yet, but he thinks he is, and he's trying to get away from everybody with Bertha and just make a fortune selling her, and just then buy all the women who don't nag him that he could possibly want. So Usanga's a total villain here. He's an utterly rotten person. But his characterization, he's got this enormous ego, but that's counterpointed by his terrible fear of his nagging wife. And it kind of makes him a fun character. But any other comments about it's chapter 12?
Well, is this? Yeah, am I jumping ahead? Is Tarzan climbed on board?
Not yet. It's a cliffhanger ending with Usanga taking off with Bertha. So
okay. I'll hold my comment then.
Okay. Anything from you, Scott?
No, just it's kind of interesting adversary here, and not wondering if there's something in his background, how he knew to ask how to learn to fly the plane or something like that. That seemed a little strange for me, but there could be someone that's wanting to learn how to do it because he wants to do it for the power or the everything that it would give a person who knows how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of his ego, because he thinks he's the cat's meow, and he's just desperately wanting to get away from his nagging wife.
I think it also that's up an exciting scene though too that we're going to see here in a minute.
Oh, it is. Well, we're coming up to like another epic action scene in chapter 13. Usanga reminds me a little of real life pirate Stede Bonnet, who was a contemporary of Blackbeard, who was a wealthy landowner, but went off and become a pirate because he wanted to escape his nagging wife, according to the story. We don't know for sure if that's true. So getting away from nagging wives is often the motivation of villains or would-be villains. Chapter 13.
Well, hindsight. Real quick, if I may jump in. Hindsight's 20/20. If this fellow here who ran off to be a pirate, if he had to do over again, it might have been easier just to turn his wife over to the pirates and tell them to take her off.
Yeah, because he was actually a terrible pirate and he ended up hanging.
So he should have thought that through.
He should have.
I'm done.
Okay.
He could have told her that he's sending her to an exercise resort where they do planking.
Mhm. There we go.
That's why I had to interrupt you, Tim. I couldn't let that one go.
That's fine. No, I am actually married to the most wonderful woman in the world, so sometimes I pretend to complain she's nagging, which she never does, and I need to remember that. I'm going to sell you to the pirates. Um, okay. So, chapter 13, Tarzan has found out that they've left. He's read the note and he's glad they're gone, but he decides to follow them because he's an Englishman and he can't ignore that, even though he's telling himself he wants nothing to do with civilization. And she's a woman and he can't ignore that. His conscience continues to trouble him. So, this is the chapter where he actually literally compares himself to be to a weak old woman because of this. But it's really his strength, his honor. It's what's a big part of what makes him a hero. He gets there just as Usanga is taking off, and so he lassos the plane. He gets the rope up to it, and Bertha catches it, and she has to hold on while he's climbing up. And I don't know if we're ever given Tarzan's weight, but he's a big guy. I'm going to say probably close to 200 pounds. But she manages to hold on until he gets up there. He throws Usanga out, and he lets Bertha bring the plane back to the ground. Um, and they when they land, they just mow through Usanga's men with the propeller. I'm not sure if the propeller would survive that in real life, but it does here. And then he's rescued her, and she happens to know how to fly a plane, so she's able to land it. When I was reading this, I was thinking, wait a minute, Tarzan knows how to fly, and then I realized I had my timeline wrong. It's 2 more books before he takes flying lessons, 3 more books before he takes flying lessons, and then he's not very good at it at first. So, he lets Percy and Bertha fly off, and he thinks he's finally done with them, and he just thinks, too bad she's a German and a spy, for she's very hard to hate. That I believe that's a direct quote from the book. Um, so this is an epic action scene. Him climbing up the rope with Bertha desperately holding on and taking over the plane in midair. I just wonder if this incident is what later inspired Tarzan to take flying lessons. Later on, Korak's got a plane and he knows how to fly, and Tarzan is saying that skill would have come in handy back at that one time. I need to learn how to fly. But any comments from you guys about this chapter?
And he does fly in later books too. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's
with the war and stuff like that, and crashing and all that. So I think it's a good setup for it and a good premise.
Yeah, it is. I know he was a reserve colonel in the RAF during World War II. We learned that from the Foreign Legion.
Yeah.
And I know Will Murray has him serving with his own personal P-40 fighter plane. So yeah, but this might have been his inspiration. This might have been what made him think, this is a skill I need to add to my resume. So any other comments?
Yeah, I'm sitting here boasting. I need to point out that I think this whole thing is just super exciting.
It is.
Open cockpit plane and and Tarzan using a rope to climb on board. I think that's super exciting. And I have to admit, I have distinct memories of an Abbott and Costello film where there's it's probably Keep 'Em Flying. They did several movies with military themes or military background. And one of those was about the Army Air Force in those days. And there's a fellow who gets his parachute hung up on the tail of the plane as it's flying along. He's stuck out there, so they got to figure out what to do with him. But my point is, being someplace where you're not supposed to be, that is the outside of a plane attached to a rope that's in flight, that's kind of dangerous. And I have to say, nothing I would do, but certainly is exciting and interesting to look at and talk about. So I think this whole segment is well done. Is my point.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out here is that on our list of artwork there's the J. Allen St. John black and white sepia showing Tarzan hanging on that rope, and the wind's and they're all flying around, and he's trying to make his way into the plane. So the artwork shows you just enough that he's taking a big chance here, and let the imagination do the rest. I'm done.
Okay, but I agree it's a wonderful action scene. It's this, Bertha's attack with the apes in the village, and the attack in the trenches with the lion and the machine gun. So far we have our epic action scenes amongst the best that Burroughs ever did. We're up to a count of 3, and we're going to add at least one more to that before we're done.
And I'd also like to add, I like the fact that Tarzan didn't, in his super mental prowess, sit down and remember which controls he saw being used or whatever. Fact that he had to ask her to fly back instead of just a lot of writers would just have such a superhuman hero. Oh, now I know how to do this, or I'll figure it out and make it do it. So I like the fact he has to kind of turn his lead or command over to her. And I think that A and C, I think that Abbott Costello movie was Keep 'Em Flying.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. It is kind of I don't think it was hinted at that Bertha knew how to fly a plane until this moment. But I wasn't bothered by that. She's a capable person that she might have had flying lessons, especially in her work as a spy, where that could come in handy. I think was perfectly reasonable. So
excuse me, real quick. I just had a thought. It won't help. It's probably not very useful for the books we've already looked at, but going forward, let's give some thought to identifying our favorite super great action scene in the entire book. Not that we're going to give anybody an award for it or anything. It might be interesting to talk about, and
we'll do that at the end before we sign off, because we're going to have, because I think their last stand in the gorge after they escape from the city of the madmen is another epic scene. So we're going to add at least one more great action scene to it, and then we can like rate them. Give the Bertha Kitchener Great Action Scene Award. This will be the premier award of that. We'll do that again in the future.
That's great. That's wonderful.
That.
Yes.
That works. We'll make that a standard part of the thing. Best action scene gets the Bertha Kitchener Award. Okay. Chapter 14. Tarzan finally thinks he's done with civilization now. And he finds a lion in a pit dug by the cannibal tribe. And there were no spikes at the bottom of the pit, so he knows that they want to torture the poor animal to death afterwards. He throws the lion some food and gets it out. And it's an Andrew Keys in the lion situation, where the lion recognizes that Tarzan has saved him, and is going to be a loyal companion for most of the rest of the book. Tarzan enters the gorges again, in the desert at the edge of at the desert after he leaves the jungle, and he's going through those when he reaches the point where he found the bones of the ancient Spanish warrior, and he hears a gunshot in the distance, which is one of the last things he expects to hear. So it's very typical of ERB heroes to benefit when they show kindness to animals. David Innes showed kindness to a hyenodon, and it became a companion and saved him. Von Horst showed, is it Old White, the mammoth?
Old White.
Kindness, and it became a loyal companion to him and saved his life. So it pays off when Burroughs heroes are kind to animals, in earning them a loyal companion and often leading to their lives being saved later on. And that's going to happen with this lion. So any comments from you guys about chapter 14?
Is this a different lion than we had earlier in the German trenches?
It's a different lion. Yeah. So so the first one he just trained through fear. This one he makes friends with by saving it and being kind to it.
Well, there you go. That's another feather in his cap for the challenge he took on with the young Jad Valjean then.
Yeah, this is kind of why he was really, when he bet Korak that he could train Jad Valjean 2 books from now, he was running a little bit of a con on his son by not telling him, I've done this before. I know how to befriend lions. So
obviously Korak needs to be reading these books.
He should be, by golly. So, but he's been off in France fighting, so we can't blame him for getting behind in the books.
Okay, point made. I'm done.
Yeah. Okay.
I think this is one of those chapters I call sometimes take a breath. where
Mhm.
Burroughs has had so much going on and is prepping to get. There's a lot going to come on in the next couple of chapters where, even though there's some action, he's helping line out a pit. It kind of gives you, it's a shorter chapter and a kind of a breather in between the next roller coaster that's coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thing. I think there's a real matter of pacing here. I think that's very insightful, and I had no thought about that. You do have something important to advance the plot in introducing the lion, but there's not a
Yeah.
lot of hardcore action. It is that breather that you need to put into books like this in order to emphasize the cool action that comes later on. So, yeah, very good point. Chapter 15, we flash back a little to the plane where Percy and Bertha have taken off, and a vulture flies into the propeller, and then he has to crash land again. He ends up in one of the gorges. He's trying to fix the plane, but he can't this time. It's too far damaged. And that lion shows up. This is the same lion that was just rescued from the pit, although as far as they know, it's just a lion. They climb up onto their plane to stay away from it. And Tarzan shows up, and he befriends the lion. The gunshot that Tarzan heard was Percy trying to scare the lion away with the pistol. There's a great line of dialogue here because Bertha was afraid he'd shoot the lion, and he knew the pistol wasn't a heavy enough gun to do any good. She says, "For heaven's sake," she cried, "don't shoot at him with that thing. You might hit him." It's one of my favorite lines of dialogue in the book. They start heading south to try and get to safety again. So he's stuck escorting these people again. The lion remains behind, but they come across the footprints of lions together with humans wearing sandals on their feet. And I love the way it's phrased in the ERB list plot summary. Tarzan does a Sherlock Holmes, identifying the prints of those of white men rather than Negroes. And so they find a cave to stay in for the night. Poor Percy he's the unluckiest pilot in the world. There's nothing to indicate he's a bad pilot, but he simply cannot fly from point A to point B without having to make an emergency landing. The guy just has the worst luck as a pilot ever. But any comments from you guys?
You just got to learn to watch out for vultures, I reckon.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Wasn't it a bird in the engine that took out the Miracle on the Hudson with Captain Scully landing the plane in real life? Wasn't it a bird in the engine that started that?
That sounds right. I wonder if that was a vulture.
I don't know. There's a species of vulture out there that hates airplanes enough to give their lives to take them down.
Hey, sometimes it's a matter of me or them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done.
Okay.
No
Okay, chapter 16. They're in the jungle. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead a chapter. I was about to read the wrong plot summary. Sorry. So they're stalked by lions in the night. Tarzan gives his philosophy of life and death again. Few of us live to old age in the jungle. But he knows that there's lions and at least one man out there that they're together. And suddenly they're attacked by a combination of lions and men. And Tarzan's knocked unconscious by a fall. And when he wakes up, he finds the black lion, his friend, standing over him. And the two, Percy and Bertha, are missing. So Tarzan and his friendly lion kill two more bad guy lions. And they're following the trail into a well-watered valley where, again, the lion, for the time being, leaves him. And that's where chapter 16 leaves off. Second time Tarzan's been knocked out in this book. Is that a record? It's not unusual for him to be knocked out, but
I don't think it's a record. I think he's been knocked out a couple times.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. I wonder what book he's knocked out the most often in. He rarely gets through a book without being knocked out at least once. And sometimes being left with amnesia because of it. But this is the second time, and I don't know what the record
Well, I'm
is.
the guy that likes to do research.
Yeah, something for somebody to look up. So, any other comments on chapter 16, though?
Nothing for me.
Okay, well, he's about to introduce a lost civilization, which I believe is the first lost civilization Tarzan encounters since Opar. It's going to be a pretty standard thing in his life to find lost civilizations, but this is up to now, it's been relatively rare. In chapter 17, he he eventually finds he's eventually surrounded by lions again, who just lie down in a circle around him. And then later on, a man who's like with yellow parchment-like skin and stiff black hair comes down. He has a spear and he has a heavy saber in a scabbard, and he talks to Tarzan in a language that Tarzan can't understand. But he makes it clear by sign language that Tarzan has to follow him or he'll be torn apart by lions. And Tarzan thinks that this guy is nuts. He's rational in some way, but he seems insane in other ways. He escapes by leaping into the trees, and he continues on his search for his companions, and he comes upon a walled city with minarets rising from the inside. And he watches as the man and the lion return, and they enter the city, and he knows his friends are inside. So he returns at night, and he runs for the wall, being chased by a lion. This chapter ends with a really effective cliffhanger. Will he make it to the wall and get up before the lion that's chasing him will catch him? And as I said, this is the first lost civilization he's encountered since Opar in The Return of Tarzan. It is the start of his regularly encountering lost civilizations, because he'll find Paludan in the next book. In the one after that is the Golden Lion, where they find that intelligent ape civilization near Opar. After that is the Ant-Man. After that is Roman Empire remnant. After that is the descendants of Crusaders, and so on. So it's about to become a regular thing. Lost civil. He is going to be, so he can't duck behind a bush to relieve himself without finding another lost civilization. But any comments from you guys about this chapter?
I wanted to point out the Valentine paperback edition of Tarzan Untamed has what I'm pretty confident now is a picture of this city. It's interesting is that I would suggest getting a copy of that paperback and taking a good look at it. You can find pictures online, and I could post it in my discussion group if anybody wants to see it. But to describe the picture, there is what looks like a pathway. It could be a pathway made of bones, but it's a golden pathway like the yellow brick road almost. And then there's this beautiful city in the far distance. And the artwork is by Richard Powers. So it's in that series of books. And the book is basically read with some white trimming. It says Tarzan Untamed, of course. And it really is, the artwork suggests all kinds of wonderful things. Little do we know the place is run by people that, shall we say, are mentally challenged. So I'm done.
Okay.
By the time I went through the chapter, I thought there was kind of a lost opportunity here. So far in the book, and we'll see more of it later on, you could have named it Tarzan the Untamed and the Big Cats. I don't think any of the book have so many leopards and so many lions in it as they do here. And when he enters this valley, this desolate type valley, and they mentioned a large number of snakes, and also mentions that he sees signs of a crocodile. I think it would have been, there was a lot of room to make for extra creepiness and danger in this, between the snakes that could be there, him trying to get through, and crocodile, if those are only adversities, but there's just mentioned in a short passage, and I'm expecting more. And then he, shoots the bird with the arrow, and then continues on and meets a man who makes me think of a Neanderthal or something. We'll see more about that in the coming chapter. But I just thought there's kind of a missed opportunity. I was expecting more jungle danger here. And if you look at a lot of books, I don't think ERB used the crocodiles or snakes that often, Hista, in the books as being in danger or fighting with them. They're mentioned once in a while and stuff, but nothing like the big cats or rhinos or hippopotamuses or anything else like that.
I think you're right. The big cats were his most common enemy, but they are just like running over. There are a couple that run us over with lions and leopards in this one. I agree.
If I could jump in here before we go forward.
Mhm.
First of all, I distinctly recall, because it's on the cover of the books, I think it's a Bolgani. I don't think it's Mangani. Fighting a snake, a good sized snake, big old snake, too big snake. And he's all wrapped up, and Tarzan's come to rescue him. And that incident, I think, occurs in chapter 1. I wanted to say that's on Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, one of the issues of Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle.
I think
But
that
that
is.
was-
I think that
Sounds
is.
right.
I think it is
That-
Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle.
Yeah,
I
but
think.
Yeah, and you talk about good sized reptiles. That one's in these books. That one certainly comes to mind. But the real reason I'm interrupting here is I wanted to point out in my survey of artwork associated with this book, I wanted to point out the frontispiece by Joe Jusko from the current brand new editions. That frontispiece has Tarzan confronting, if I can count them correctly here, there's 3, 4, 5, let's say 5 lions. And I wasn't sure where exactly in the book this scene occurs. I'm sure it's in there somewheres. We've not encountered it yet, unless it goes back to what Scott was just saying a moment ago about all these lions. And I know in that city of Zuja, they've run into some lions there.
Yeah, well, he is
that could be what this.
in this chapter. He is briefly surrounded by lions, and he escapes from them from jumping up into the trees. So
Well, I would say that's what this is then, right here.
Mhm.
And of course, it's beautifully well done, as is everything by Jusko. And this is the frontispiece. So when you get that edition from the ERB Authorized Library, be sure to take a look at the frontispiece. I'm done.
Okay. Well, chapter 18, we switch back to Bertha and Percy, and they're captured by the men with the trained lions, and they're taken to the city. On the way, they bow to a parrot, and one of the guards is eaten by a lion. They can't understand the language of these people, but it seems a little familiar. The letters on the doors over the shops that they see seem to be of Greek origin, but it's not exactly Greek. I don't know if we ever learned the origin of their language or not. But they're taken eventually to.
I was thinking the parrots communicate with the residents.
No, they do. Yeah, these are parrots that can actually spot things and then call out where they are. So I don't think they actually have conversations, but they can at least somehow communicate. You know, your prey is 100 yards to your north or something. So, but they also worship parrots, I believe. Because their society, because they're all crazy. It is a city of maniacs. Their society does not make rational sense in every way. But Percy is lagging.
If they've trained parrots.
Jess, are you there? You got cut off.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to say, if they've trained parrots to hunt down food for them, they may not be as crazy as we think they are.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm done now. Now I am done. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Percy is lags behind because of his wounds. One of the guards starts to beat him, and Bertha fights the man and takes the sword, and he just starts laughing hysterically, the guard. So they realize they're amongst madmen, and she can't fight them all, so she throws the sword to the ground. Percy thinks he's dying of his wounds. They also, by the way, think Tarzan's dead, so they're not depending on Tarzan to rescue them. He says, I love you. And she says, well, don't give up and I'll try to love you, trying to encourage him. They see a lot of random violence in the city, like a child is just murdered before their eyes by a screaming maniac. Percy still has his pistol, and Bertha says, keep one bullet for her, because if some horrible things are going to happen to her, she'd rather just die cleanly. But he says, I can never kill you no matter what. And they're led into a more ornamental part of the city where the decorations are mostly parrots, and they're brought before a man at a table who sends Bertha out of the building with guards, and they take Percy out to a courtyard and lock him up with a bunch of lions. And that's the cliffhanger ending of this chapter. And Burroughs obviously gave a lot of thought into giving this city a sense of history and a sense of historical background, even though if we don't know what it is. in creating actually a believable city, even though it's populated by insane people and they all have pet lions. It still comes, we still accept it in context of the story. It still seems like this is a real place. He's just that vivid and that good at establishing the story content here that that he just is that good. So any comments from you guys on this chapter?
Are you saying it's a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there?
Basically, yes. I don't even know if I'd want to visit though. You couldn't find a sane tour guide to take you around. So
Airbnb.
Talk to the parrots. I'm done.
that's right.
I think this is one of the more nightmarish chapters Burroughs ever wrote.
Mhm.
And I tend to bring in cinema or film a lot because it's a big part of my life and a lot of things I've worked with in my life. But reading this and thinking in terms of a cinematic outlook, the claustrophobia, the closed in streets and arches and 2+ story buildings you're going through, having this person, however you want to call them, people or creatures or whatever, grabbing a child and beating it to death and slamming it down on the concrete. Just talk about brutal. Just a very nightmarish sequence.
It is, yes. This works as a little bit of a horror story. Much the same way the last part of Land Before Time, the Out of Time's Abyss, works when Bradley, the main character in that one, is trapped in the City of Skulls with the Weirdos. It reads often like a horror story. Burroughs I don't think he ever wrote a straight horror story, but he obviously understood how to terrify people when he wanted to. I agree. This is a bit of a horror story here. This is a horrible place to be. Well, chapter 19 is the Queen story. Bertha is taken to a largest building. I'll just call it a palace, where she's brought to a very old woman who speaks English. And this woman has been there for 60 years. She was the daughter of a missionary who was captured by Arabs, and then they were later captured by the people from the city. She's been there for 60 years. She's now considered a queen. There's been multiple kings who have gotten assassinated. It's a very violent place. She tells the story of the place was once found by a giant Spaniard who once came to the city, and that's the explanation for the skeleton in the desert, that the Spaniard did not get out of the desert alive after finding the city. They're eventually brought to the king, but as they wait in the anteroom of the king, one of the king's sons, Metak, remember, he's nuts. He just immediately decides he wants her, embraces her, kills a couple of guards, and carries her away. And that's the cliffhanger ending of chapter 19. And once again, he puts a lot of thought into the history of this city and gives us a believable historical background. As fantastic as the situation is, he grounds it in a sense of reality so that we accept it while we're reading it. But any comments from you guys?
I was just sympathizing for Bertha Kircher there. Just when you think you're making your way back to something normal, you wind up in a city of nutcases.
Yeah.
And now one's wanting to go off with you.
Yeah, this place is basically Arkham Asylum with the inmates ruling the place.
That's a good analogy. I like that. I can relate to that. I'm done.
Okay. If any other comments from the chapter, or we'll go to chapter 20?
I think this is, and knowing where we are in the book, this is one of those places where Burroughs seems to be opening up the path towards how the story is going to end, the book's going to end, and closing in explanations of why these civilizations or people are here, the thing about the Spaniard, starting to bring some of these loose ends together. The part about she's been a queen for so many years under so many kings basically is like she's been a trafficked woman. She's been a prisoner there.
Yeah.
And passed off from one king to another, which is another showing of the horrid part of where they are and where they're living here. But this is kind of where those chapters we've seen in other books starts to become a crossroads. This stuff's leading up to this, and this stuff's now going to lead over here towards closing up the story, the book.
Now I wonder, the Opar is the only lost civilization before this that Tarzan has encountered. And of course, Burroughs had already had practice creating bizarre civilizations on Mars. There have been 4 Mars books by this time that we were between Thuvia and Chessmen of Mars. But is the amount of work he obviously put into creating a viable lost civilization here? I wonder if this is if he had fun doing this and he thought, I'm going to do this more often. I love coming up with lost civilizations and coming up with a culture that makes sense and a history for them that makes sense and all of that, because he did it so well and it became a regular aspect of Tarzan's life. So I just wonder if maybe as a writer, he had a lot of fun doing this and just thought, this is going to be a part of how I make a living now.
I think that's a very good point. I really had not considered that, but by golly, it makes a lot of sense. You consider Tarzan's typical day. He wakes up, he looks in the Kima or Jane's, what are we going to do today? Well, we'll roam around the jungle and maybe get into a fight with a lion or something of that nature. So this breaks my point is this breaks up the monotony. It introduces new characters, it introduces a new situation. It puts Tarzan in potentially or his friends in danger, so that he's going to have to do something heroic. I think it's a real plot device, and obviously this is one of the first lost civilizations, and I agree with you. I think Burroughs had some fun with it, and so he could do things. It takes you to place. The lost civilization takes you someplace that you didn't expect to go to when you bought the book, unless you saw a hint of it in the book cover or something like that. So I agree. I'm done.
I also wonder about the current state of this community, because obviously it's pretty closed in and exclusive. Very little contact, maybe a couple hundred years ago or whenever the English woman came in, but very little contact besides that. And this isn't meant to be a joke or politically incorrect, but being such a closed and smaller community, if the way they look and the way they act, that there wouldn't be a legitimate problem because of inbreeding.
Yeah, you could probably explain a lot of why they're nuts due to that. It's not a bad theory at all. So
they need to get out more.
Yeah, but I would suspect by now this happened in 1914. Or 1915 or 16, if we flew over to Africa and drove over to the city, I'm not sure there'd be anybody left by now. I do not think this was a situation viable enough to last much longer.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Diseases or whatever, infighting or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, so was there people enough to organize coherent food production to keep it going?
Parrots probably took over.
Yeah. So chapter 20, we actually jump back to the British Army for a little bit. They've been looking for Percy, and another plane spotted his downed airplane and also spotted the city. So the general orders 2 companies of soldiers to go out with them, and they make plans to make sure they're supplied and they have water that they can take and all of that. So they plan this out intelligently. He's setting up the rescue that will happen in the last chapter. Then we go back to Tarzan, who a couple of chapters ago was racing to the wall ahead of a lion. He makes it to the wall. He climbs up some vines. He strangles a guard, though, once he gets up there. And he disguises himself in the guard's yellow tunic. He has to leave his spear and his bow behind because that doesn't fit into his disguise, but he wraps his rope around his waist. He's still got his knife, and then he's got the weapons he took from the guard. And he enters the city, and he eventually notices a young man lowering himself from the roof of a building. And that's the end of chapter 20. So early on with the scene with the soldiers, he's setting up what'll happen at the end. But we also see Tarzan, he's in the city and he's got to find Bertha and Percy. It's a long shot that'll find them, but he's acting with intelligence and he's planning each of his moves as much as he possibly can. So this not only shows off Tarzan's physical skills, but it also shows that he's a really smart guy and he thinks about what he does before he does it. Any comments from you guys?
I was just gonna say, little does this soldier know this. Someone climbing around outside of a building like that up in the air is probably an everyday occurrence there.
Yeah. So
I'm done.
okay. Any other comments?
I think this is another part of the pacing we talked about, like the breather chapter. Some
Mhm.
stuff happens, but it's moving forward to the next section because, well, we got like 4 chapters to go or whatever, and it's going to move pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. It is because it's going to be pretty nonstop from now on. Because chapter 21, Percy wakes, he's collapsed unconscious in the courtyard with a lion, and when he wakes up, there's a lion licking his face. But to Percy's credit, he keeps his head all of this. The lions don't harm him, and he manages to climb a tree, and he finds a young woman, a lovely young woman who just begins to kiss him. Remember, they're all nuts. And she just like apparently decides right away that she's in love with this guy she's never seen before, who just climbed in through his window. Somebody else enters, a guy enters and attacks him, so he has to shoot him. Remember, he's still got his pistol. So the young woman beats the face of the dead guy, and then they hide the body in an alcove. Then a knock comes on the door, and the girl has him hide behind a curtain. But as soon as someone else comes in, she betrays him because whatever insane way her mind works, she's decided, oh, I love him, I'll hide him. Oh, wait a minute, he's an enemy, I'll betray him. And the guy just plunges his saber through the curtains where Percy where actually is. And then we break away from that scene and we go back to Metak, the king's son who took Bertha. They're being chased by guards, and he carries her into a room with a pool, and he dives into it and into the captive with him. And then we go back to Percy, who has found a hidden panel behind the curtain, and he's escaped down a corridor before he can be killed by the guy with the saber. And he climbs down a ladder to a roof of the building, and he's accosted by a man in a yellow tunic, which is going to be Tarzan. I think every reader reading this realizes that. But Percy does show admirable courage through this whole chapter. And we see that Burroughs is starting to set up the situation so all the protagonists are going to end up rejoining each other. And the pacing of the action does start to pick up. So any comments from you guys?
No, nothing from me.
I at first was wondering about the fact that he wakes up to the lion licking his face and they hadn't pounced on him. Then I rationalized for myself, and he's dropped down in here. He's laying there. Maybe the lions are used to seeing people around in this area or this pit. It's the yard. He wasn't a threat to him because he's not moving. He's unconscious. So it could be possible that they'd be over there sniffing and licking his face. And when he did move or whatever, they're kind of like whatever, because he wasn't a danger to them and they already ate. They weren't hungry. And
well, remember also, these are trained lions. So they're not going to act automatically the way a wild lion would. So they may have been waiting, without a command to attack him. Go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say, how else do you find out what flavor that victim is laying there?
Well, there you go. Yeah, he might be strawberry, and they don't like strawberry, so you never know. So
strawberry, vanilla.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In chapter 22, we find out that the lion that was chasing Tarzan to the wall of the city was his friend, the black lion. Tarzan hadn't realized that in the dark. So he follows Tarzan into the city through a goat corral, and and so the lion is, we're bringing all the protagonists together. That includes the lion, the friendly lion who's now back in the city. Anyway, Percy and Tarzan realize who each other is. They return to the niche that led to the girl, and here they hear whispers behind the curtain, and they see a slave, a black slave, Otambu, who is a member of the cannibal tribe that they encountered earlier in the book. So Tarzan speaks his language, and they whisper to him and they say, help us attack this guy and the girl, and we'll help you get away. So, uh, um, let's see what happens. Percy ends up dressing in a dead man's robe, so he's kind of disguised now. They all sit down to have something to eat while Tarzan's trying to pump information from the girl about where Bertha might be located. Then a knock comes on the door and somebody shouts for help. And Tarzan, and Percy go to the door, and when they return, they find out Otoba they think he's dead. He's just unconscious, and the girl and the man they had captured were missing. So, they find another ally here, and it's especially handy. It's someone who speaks the language of the maniacs that they can use as an interpreter, though it briefly appears he's killed. But once again, we're moving things along, and they're about to be rejoined with Bertha in the next chapter. So the action is moving along quickly, and Burroughs is once again working to bring everybody together again for the upcoming finale. Any comments from you guys about this chapter?
Nothing from me.
No, that pretty much summarized where we're going with this. Yeah.
Okay, well, chapter 23 is, last time we saw Bertha, she's being carried by Metak, who dived into a pool, and he knew of a long winding corridor he could swim through that came out in a lagoon. So he got away from the people chasing them that way. But they eventually, Metak eventually gets her alone in the room and is making advances on her. She's holding him off with a spear, finally throwing it, but she misses and Metak's upon her. But then Tarzan and Percy find a trapdoor in the roof that's locked when they were trying to get away, and they come back just in time to save Bertha, because this is the room that Metak brought them to. So Tarzan fights with Metak and eventually throws him through a window into a pit of lions. Atobu, who they thought was dead, sits up. He was only knocked out, so he's with them. He leads them towards the city gates, but the body of Metak is discovered, and the locals call out the lions and the parrots. Remember, the parrots can scout and actually give warnings. So the guards at the gate are warned that they're coming. Then the black lion that's friendly with Tarzan shows up. That gives them enough of an edge to be able to charge the guards at the gate. There's a battle there, and they finally manage to get the gates open and make a run for it. They have to carry Percy with them, who by now, remember, was mauled earlier by lions and is now on the verge of exhaustion. But they're now trying to make their getaway across the plains outside the cities. So great action here. Coming up on the scene that I will include in our nominees for the Bertha Kitchener Best Action Award. That'll happen in the last chapter. But there was some great action in this one. The pacing is lightning fast. One thing happens after another. I'm not sure my summary made it clear of the events as they happen, but everything happens in a logical order that makes sense within context of the story. And it's just great. It's especially the storming of the gate at the end of the chapter is a great action sequence. Comments from you guys?
This is typical of Burroughs in his stories. That is, turning it up the pace, turning it up a notch in the last 2 or 3 chapters to get things wrapped up. I've grown up with this, and I really hardly even think of anything of it, and I always enjoy it because I'm ready to know what's going on next year, because I can see the story's coming to an end. So yeah, I'm anxious to find out what's going to happen. So yeah, no point in messing around. Let's get it all taken care of. So I'm fine with that. But do other writers do this? I've never really noticed it. Other writers turning up the pace to wrap things up.
Yeah, there are other great adventure writers who do this. Robert E. Howard did it in his novellas, and there's one Conan novel. He would have there'd be lots of action, but it would really pick up the pace at the end in order to bring everything to a climax. So it's a common thing amongst adventure writers. Burroughs just did it all better than just about everybody else.
And as also common in like people, like you mentioned, Robert E. Howard and stuff,
Mhm.
who I also love. And you'll see it in a lot of movies because of the pacing. This seems like, okay, they storm the gate, which is a big deal and would be action packed,
Mhm.
but then they're able to break free. They're escaping. So it's like, okay, this was the climactic end. They're escaping. Now they're going to go out and find safety. But Burroughs and a lot of others say, no, we're not quite there yet. There's still something coming up in the next chapter.
Mhm. Yep, if there's a chapter to go, there's still more. He never does a complete, he rarely does a chapter where it just wraps everything up. He might sometimes do a brief epilogue, but if there's a whole chapter at the end, then more action stuff is going to happen. Um, and that's what happens here. Our final chapter, chapter 24, they get to the gorge, those gorges outside at the edge of the desert, but both Bertha and Percy are just, they're out of energy. Percy's been wounded. They've been on the go constantly. They're both exhausted. They can't go any farther. So they make a last stand in a narrow section of the gorge between a large rock and the cliff. And Tarzan says, "We still live." It's the chapter summary in ERB list says this is the ubiquitous ERB motto. This is what all his heroes say. As long as they still live, there's still hope. There's what I think is another epic fight. Tarzan takes a spear to the shoulder. Percy takes a spear to his leg, and it looks like they're doomed. But then the British soldiers show up and they save them. Yeah, it was at a point where Burroughs writes that even the ape man had given up the last vestige of hope. But the soldiers show up, they are rescued. Percy and Bertha are sent back to the British headquarters by plane. Tarzan and Atuba head west on their own because he's got his deal with Atuba was to get him home to the cannibals. But the officer in charge tells Tarzan that Bertha is really Patricia Canby. She's a British intelligence agency. She was the double agent. And then she shows Tarzan the diary of Hauptmann Schneider. This is what Bertha had taken off of Schneider when Schneider was killed, I believe. And in it says, we've played a mean joke on this ape man. We're going to take his wife prisoner and we're going to leave somebody else's body burned and with the rings on so that he'll think his wife is dead. So Tarzan's still alive. So that means that after he gets a tuba back home, he's got to rejoin the British and then start trying to find his wife. And last thing we find out about is that Percy and Bertha do plan to get married. So she's finally decided she's in love with him. And that is the end of the book. And that action sequence is going to be my fourth nominee in this book for the Bertha Kitchener Great Action Scene Award, which we'll talk about as soon as we finish talking about the book in general. I will say that Tarzan shows very poor first aid skills because he simply tears the spear out of his shoulder. And you're not supposed to do that because you might tear an artery or the spear might be plugging up a torn artery. But he's Tarzan, he can get away with stuff like that. So, but it's not it seems real because a few chapters before he had introduced the idea of the British coming out to check out the city. So he set this up perfectly. It didn't seem like it was a deus ex machina where it just out of the blue, the British show up. He had set it up properly to make it believable and then had them come in at the appropriate last minute to do a rescue. And it's just a wonderful action scene. But comments from you guys?
Well, this is one of I have many favorites, and by golly, this is towards the top of the list. I really have enjoyed this book many times over. I'm glad we got to talk about it tonight. So, no specific comments at the moment. I'll probably think of something after a while. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry. Exceptionally well written book. I mean, we say that about all of them, but this is just he's at the top of the game with his prose and descriptions and plot line. And I like this chapter too. There's a good strong amount of action. Are they going to die? No, Tarzan's not going to die, but and he wraps it up. It's kind of like, well, this is the end. And why carry it on too long? And provides all the answers, and I think it's a real clean finish to the book.
I agree. It is this and Tarzan the Terrible, the direct sequel to it, which involves him finding and rescuing Jane. you can put them together and call them one story. Just like you can put Tarzan of the Apes and Return of Tarzan together and call them one story. And so it is almost a tie in my mind, what I would call the best Tarzan novels, whether it's the first two or whether it's Tarzan the Untamed and Tarzan the Terrible. They're both so excellent, and they're both so steeped in great storytelling and great action and great characters that I would be hard put to point to one or the other and say this is the best one. I'd probably give a different answer on any one day.
Good stuff.
Something else I'll just mention in general is this starts as a war/revenge story, and then it turns into a lost civilization story. But there's no awkwardness to it. The change from one type of story to another is handled very naturally, and it's appropriate to the plot as the plot unfolds. And he combined those two novellas expertly. It reads smoothly as a novel. Any other final comments before we decide who to award the Bertha Kircher Award to?
Well, the last few chapters, finding the lost city and stuff like that, get a soundtrack of songs by Jimmy Buffett for all the parrot heads out there.
Good one.
Yeah, it was. It is. Yeah. Maybe actually it's going to sound mean because I like Jimmy Buffett music, but maybe
I do
listening
too.
too much, maybe listening to too much Jimmy Buffett is what put them all over the edge as a culture.
No,
Yeah.
you can't listen to
Yeah,
too
you
much.
can't. No, you really can't listen too much to Jimmy Buffett. He's too good. Okay, so the Bertha Kircher Best Action Award. The nominees are clearing the German trenches with a lion, grenades, and a machine gun. There is climbing up a rope to a plane that's already flying and rescuing Bertha. There is Bertha leading the apes in an attack on the cannibal village to rescue Tarzan and Percy. And there is the last stand in the gorge where it looks like they're doomed, and Tarzan's wounded with a spear, and it seems hopeless when the British Army shows up at the end to rescue them. Those are the four nominees. Jess, who's the winner, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I'll go with the first one. That is Tarzan in the trenches with the lion and the machine gun, and having, in effect, they cover the Gold Key comic.
Yeah. Scott, how about you? Of those four, what's the best?
I go with the lion in the trench and machine guns too. And another one that we didn't mention, but I still find haunting, is the walk through the city of the madman, of the maniacs. It's not the same type of action, but it's a horrifying piece of a story movement.
Yeah, it is.
But
And
yeah, the lion in the trench is just, it's got it.
Yeah, it does. And in my opinion, is probably also affected by that Gold Key cover, which is arguably the best comic book cover ever. But yes, I think we're going to have a unanimous vote here. So the first ever Bertha Kircher Best Action Scene Award goes to Tarzan in the trenches with his lion, machine gun, and grenades. We'll make this a regular reward. Well, because when we do Tarzan the Terrible next, we'll have to decide on the best action scene and give it the Bertha Kircher Award.
That would work.
Yeah.
You going to list these specific category on the website?
I think I will. Because this is fun. We need to do this with every book we do. So yeah, so that is our discussion. We've gone about 2.5 hours. I think I am going to keep this in one episode because people listening to it can always hit pause and go back to it later. 2.5 hours, not that bad. So our next episode will be the sequel to this, Tarzan the Terrible, which hopefully we will get to record fairly early in 2025. Just that's it for now. Scott, you want to say goodbye and plug Urba again?
Yeah, thanks,
Appa?
everyone. Really enjoyed this episode, and we appreciate all of you out there listening for that. If you're interested in becoming further part of the Edgar Rice Burroughs community, put in ERB APA on your search engine and look up what we have information out there for join up to write articles and join fellow Urbites.
Okay, and Jess, You want to say goodbye and plug the Facebook group one more
Well,
time?
certainly, by all means, that Facebook group is For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs. Pretty near 24/7. We're talking ERB and related topics all the time. We'd love to have you join us for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs. And thank you, Tim and Scott, for this great discussion tonight. I have many favorites. This is certainly one of them. And as always, it's a fun time.
It was a fun time. I always appreciate you guys doing this. My name is Tim DeForest. My blog is Comics, Old Time Radio, and Other Cool Stuff. And you can find links to my books on Amazon there. And visit our store as well. There will be a link to our ERB store, ERB podcast store, in the show notes and on the blog for this podcast. And we have lots of cool merchandise there done by an artist friend of mine named Ben Alvarez. We got the very kind permission of ERB Inc. to use images from the book. So if you ever need a Tarkus shot glass or a hat with wool on it, or a T-shirt with a griff on it from Tarzan the Untamed, you can find them there. There is just Ben's artwork is on a variety of merchandise, and you're welcome to buy as much as you want and make us all rich beyond the dreams of avarice. But it is cool, good quality stuff. And so please visit our store as well. And that is it for now. Once again, thank you all for listening. We will be back hopefully before too long with a discussion of the sequel to this book, Tarzan the Untamed. Thank you all.